All right, hello world. This is CS50 on Twitch. My name is Colton Ogden, and today we're going to do something that I'm a little less experienced at than the other things I typically do on stream. So what we do here on the channel is usually implement something from scratch. So I am more experienced with game development, so usually I make games from scratch. However, this year, as I've said in prior streams, one of my goals is to get better at web development. And we have a bunch of staff members that are also much better skilled at web development. But today, I'm taking it on myself to, sort of per the last tutorial I did, which was on HTML, sort of the foundational technology behind web pages, the skeleton or the nouns that make up our websites. We'll be looking at CSS today. So if you tuned in for the HTML stream, you probably saw that the pages we were implementing last time with Tom Balator, who happened to be here from Japan for a brief stint, they were a little bit on the austere side. Everything was sort of black and white. We had text, we had images, and that was pretty much it. We had a couple of fun little exercises and demos there to showcase things like GIFs, which are animated images. But everything was fundamentally very plain, very black and white. No styling whatsoever, top to bottom, just sort of designed, as the web was way back in the day, just to sort of broadcast research papers and very plain bits of information. So today we're going to take a step closer to the modern web. I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but we're going to be taking a stab at CSS, so cascading style sheets. And David J. Malin is here in the chat, so everybody shout out to David for tuning back. So we had a lot of chat in the, we had a lot of people posting messages in the chat prior to the stream's beginning, and I also want to shout out ZHEL or Gel, Annie Chu, and Great Baram for following before the stream. And some folks were curious about what the music was, so I'm going to actually turn to my computer here. And this is the channel that I play music from before every stream, so they have a very generous non-copyrighted license. This in particular is a very good sort of playlist that they put together, which is pre-mixed, which is really nice for the stream, so you get a nice sample of different music. NCS 2019 20 million mix, so their 20 million subscriber sort of shout out video. It's No Copyright Sounds is the name of the channel, and all of their music is completely playable for folks such as us who want some music before a stream or for a YouTube channel or whatnot. So I use them for all of my sort of music needs, and this is me doing some research in advance of the stream. Let me make sure that I didn't miss anybody else's comments. So Bellicures, Asley, Whipstreak, which is Nate, GravyWave123, Blade AG, thank you all very much for tuning in. GravyWave saying, actually I have no idea how to pronounce that. Assalamualaikum. I'm not sure. He's saying that that's apparently greetings in Arabic. And I unfortunately have no Arabic knowledge, although Kareem speaks Arabic. So if Kareem were here, he could vouch. So Kifa Mutuma saying thanks that they love the music. Thunder 44771, what was the music? Yeah, that channel, No Copyright Sounds. Whipstreak saying, I love CSS. So Nate actually may be even better at CSS than I am. And Nate is actually 10 years old, which is insane. So shout out to Nate for joining us at such a young age. As they're saying, I hate HTML, but I'm here hoping that I'll like CSS. Well, hopefully I don't ruin that image for you. Bartle D says hello. Hello, Bartle D. What else do we have here? As he was saying, someone asked, why not learn Bootstrap instead of CSS? And actually, we will probably be doing a Bootstrap stream within the next, actually, no, we will be doing a Bootstrap stream next Friday. And we'll be doing that with Aaron, so tune in for that one. Bootstrap is a layer on top of CSS, so it's kind of a bunch of CSS that people, it's a library or a framework. It's a bunch of CSS and JavaScript, which we won't get into today, that a bunch of folks kindly put together working at Twitter when they were developing Twitter. And it's a great foundational layer to build a website off of, where you don't need to know the low-level details of CSS quite as much. And it's an awesome tool, especially for folks that are less experienced in CSS, such as, for example, myself. But we'll definitely be covering over a lot of the basics today, stuff that's fairly straightforward, fairly easy to learn. But it's a rabbit hole. There's a ton of CSS, a ton of attributes and whatnot that you can learn. Chetra saying they'll start very soon. Just making sure I've caught completely up. M. Kloppenberg's here in the chat. Hello, Martin. Good to see you. Great Baram, who followed. Thank you so much. Snorris says hello. Hello, Snorris. And thank you, Prashant11, for the follow as well. Are they going to build a web app with CSS, says Thunder 44771? Web app is, I think, a misnomer. It's not a web app per se, but we will be making a couple of, and this is dependent on how much time we actually have. So I've allocated about 3 hours for the stream. So we do have a few ideas, or I have put together a few simple ideas for some simple web pages that still look pretty nice. One even inspired by CS50's homepage that we'll get to implementing. But they're not web apps in the sense that they're functional beyond just displaying static content. A web app sort of has the connotation that it does something more behind the scenes and maybe is tied to a backend, or at least has some JavaScript built into it so it has some dynamic functionality. We will not be doing any JavaScript, any dynamic functionality today. It's purely on the aesthetics of web pages and the aesthetics of CSS. So we'll be taking a look at that here pretty soon. One sec. Once you understand a bit of CSS from here, Bootstrap will be a walk in the park, like for real. You could create a website in hours and days. It's the best thing I discovered, says Kifa Mutuma. Yeah, no, Bootstrap is great. It allows you to do a ton of stuff. Sorry, just one second. Yeah, it allows you to do a lot of stuff that would normally be kind of a hassle, like, for example, creating a nav bar, which we'll try to implement today. Doing that in CSS is incredibly easy. You basically just plug in, and we'll look at what this is. We'll look at classes. We'll say classes are a concept that we can add to our HTML to sort of specify that we should probably put, you know, maybe we want certain elements to have a bold, like a large bold size in a particular font, and maybe they have a semantic value. Maybe they're you know, in a nav bar, so they'll be considered nav elements or whatnot. So we could give them a class of nav header or nav paragraph, and that will just mean all of these elements in this nav bar should be styled a particular way. Okay. Thank you for Medi Spiegelberg. Appreciate the follow. We have a lot of chat, so I apologize. We'll probably get into this very shortly here. Noober Than You says, yo, what are we doing today? So we'll be looking at CSS, cascading style sheets, and we're just about to start diving into that, but I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Any questions? Metal Eagle says, I have seen at times there are some very detailed ways to solve very difficult styling problems, especially regarding positioning. Depending on what you have in mind, we may or may not touch on some of that details. I know, for example, absolute versus relative versus static positioning, and this can get, you can kind of get into the weeds with a lot of these things. And I'm not an expert, so depending on what problem you're trying to solve, I may or may not have the insight. But we'll look at least some of those elements, some of those attributes today, and talk about some of the differences, which maybe at least fill in some blanks for you. Will you be covering selectors and pseudo elements? Yes, we will be covering selectors and pseudo elements. Actually, pretty early we'll be covering selectors, says asked Jubon3. Kifu Mutama saying, explain the details on Flexbox. So yeah, if we have time, I actually do have some notes here on some basic Flexbox stuff. We'll be taking a look at that as well. Teens and phones, the Whipstreak 23. There already is a stream on Docker. Oh yes, Kingsley Roche. So we do have a stream on Docker. So actually, David and I did that one. So go ahead and tune in for that one. I think it was episode like 27 or 28. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, tune in for that. It's on. It should be still be a VOD on Twitch, if not on the YouTube channel. CSS grids and Flexbox, and how are they different from media queries? So actually media queries aren't part of today's stream, but a media query is essentially asking, you know, having CSS ask the browser or the DOM or whatever it's interacting with, depending on your device, how big is my page? And depending on when it gets to a certain size, it can set or disable certain elements. So this allows you to have, and this is a big thing about Bootstrap, is Bootstrap allows you to resize your page such that, we might even be able to demonstrate this with, for example, CS50's page here. And I don't remember offhand if it does this, but yeah, see how, notice when I resized the CS50 homepage, we kind of got some different functionality here. So we have a kind of a split page here, but if I go a little bit too far to the left, it ends up becoming a vertical split in this case, not a horizontal split, or I guess this would be a horizontal split, so that we have two vertical oriented panes here. And this is essentially being accomplished with a media query. So we're basically saying when the browser gets to be a certain minimum width, right, or maximum width, then we need to shrink it down. I guess it'd be a minimum width. We would need to essentially change the CSS such that the nav, the header, goes at the top. We get a menu here, so normally called a hamburger menu, but there's no hamburger icon. We can click that and open it up, and that's a JavaScript ability. And then all the content, instead of being aligned on the right side of the page, now it's strictly down below the middle of the page, right down the center. So this is accomplished via what's called a media query. Flexbox is different. Flexbox is sort of a dynamic container. It's hard to describe exactly how it is. It essentially allows you to group elements, blocked elements together, and have them dynamically sort of fill a space horizontally. And you can do a bunch of cool stuff with vertical centering and some other cool stuff. Not sure how in-depth we can get to that. We can maybe pull up some articles later, depending on how far we get with the demos on the actual low-level details of Flexbox, something that I'm still very much learning. But yeah, that is essentially what Flexbox is and what a media query is. YavPL, greetings from Poland. Bahari Web, animation too. We will not be covering CSS animation, so it's we could very easily split this stream up into like 5 separate streams, and that would be the CSS animations would be a great thing to have in a part 2, and maybe media queries and maybe responsive design kind of as a separate stream. And that would be a great way to tie all those technologies together, because that kind of gets into the more dynamic features of CSS. Today we're going to be looking more at just the static features of CSS. Are we going to have a stream on Ajax lib? So we will be having a jQuery stream at some point, and jQuery has a really nice Ajax set of functions built into it. So we'll take a look at it in that context. Tanar87 and NDKN, thank you very much for the follows. OK, so just to try and get us sort of on track a little bit, I very much appreciate all of the messages in the chat. Let's dive into a little bit of CSS. So I'm going to pull up my sort of text editor here. I'm going to eliminate my sort of sample code I have here, and I'm going to, I guess I'll just use test, but I'm going to delete everything that I have here in my 2 files. And the first thing that I kind of want to touch on is the idea of what a class is and what an ID is. So these are 2 very important things. So last week we looked at HTML, and HTML is just purely skeletal noun, sort of like what's in our web page. What are the elements themselves, right? Maybe we have paragraphs or images, tables, but we don't necessarily specify what they look like. And we do that ultimately with things called classes and IDs, although that's not strictly necessary. It's definitely a much more robust way of doing it. I can illustrate the less ideal way of doing it here if we write some simple HTML. So I'm going to go ahead and save my styles.css page, and we'll look at that in a little second here. But again, from last time in VS Code and other modern text editors, if you have an HTML file that you've saved with, for example, index.html, I can go down to, I can type the word, literally the word HTML. I get this little menu that kind of dynamically pops up. I can choose these different options here. I'm going to choose this second one, which just says simple HTML5 starting point, just so that it auto-fills my text editor with a bunch of sort of foundational HTML that we can build upon. So I'm going to set the title to stream test. I'm going to get rid of the script tag. So when we get to JavaScript, this script tag will actually be very important, but we're not doing any JavaScript today, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then I'm actually going to get rid of this link rel equals style sheet thing too, and I'm going to get rid of my sort of sidebar there. And I'm going to just kind of put in some basic HTML elements. And if anybody has any suggestions for some basic HTML so we can make this kind of dynamic and user, I guess viewer dependent, definitely toss some ideas in the chat. I'm going to start off with, for example, a div. And divs are ways that we can sort of divide. They're short for division. We can divide our web page into sort of vertical groupings of elements. And then within my div, I'm going to say, I'm going to create a p tag. Or actually, no, I'm going to create an h1. And I'm going to say CSS Test. Within that div, after that, I'm going to create a paragraph. And that's going to say, this is some paragraph text in my div. And then lag between the YouTube Live and Twitch Live. That's kind of normal, I think, Zanark. It's cross-streaming to multiple services. I think Twitch probably gets it maybe a little bit fast. And then YouTube gets it. YouTube started, I think, a little bit slower. I think there's some bit of delay there. They have to do a couple of things. They have to like preview the stream, then start it, and there's a few steps involved. But yeah, that's I think fairly normal. I think it's not normal for people to watch both at the same time and notice it. So I think whether you're watching YouTube, whether you're watching Twitch, the two are either way, you're fine. I'm going to create another div. And then in here, I'm going to say this is going to be an H2. And I'm going to say this is a second block. And then P, I'm going to say here's a little more text. And then maybe create a table here. And I can type the word table. And then I can hit Tab. And then I can go down here and say T-head, which remember, that's where we specify the header of our table. D Solinor, thank you very much for following. And then T-body right here. And within T-head, I'll say TH, and then we'll say name. We'll say image or whatever, and then major. We can maybe reuse some of the prior code that we did last time with the HTML table. VS Code for the wins is Alex. Yes, yeah, I agree. Although, I mean, all of the modern text editors, Atom, Sublime, VS Code, whatever else folks are using, even Vim, they're all great. There's a paste bin that Whipstreak said. So I don't have the chat on this computer here, Whipstreak, so I won't be able to actually click on the link. But if you want to just shout out what you put in there, sort of in a nutshell, I can take a look at it. And then within the T-body, we'll say TR. Right, because for a table row. And then within the TR, we'll do a TD. We'll do Colton. We'll assume that I have an image in here. Thank you very much, CR4ID, for the follow. Appreciate it. And then within here, we'll say that's going to be an image tag. But I don't know offhand where the image is going to be. So we'll assume it's Colton.gif for now. And I actually don't think I have a GIF of myself on that page that we got them all last time. So this might just be a placeholder. And then last time we'll say major is computer science, right? Just for now. And then let's run this. Let's just make sure that it looks OK. So OK, yep, it looks great. This is pretty much exactly like we wanted it to look. I mean, it looks awful because it's just pure HTML. There's no CSS. There's no styling. Let me see. I think before in the web section we had it here. OK, no, we have. We'll just use David. We'll use David. It's a little bit easier since we already have David's image there. I'm going to go back to my test thing here. I'm going to paste that in, and then I'm going to edit my HTML so that it says David, and then David.gif. This should work if all is well. OK, awesome. So this is just some very basic sort of CSS that we have, or sorry, some basic HTML that we have rendering in our web page. Very similar to what we looked at last week in the HTML stream. If this is all unfamiliar to you, definitely tune into the HTML video, the HTML stream, and either the VOD or the YouTube video that we have on our channel. So sort of the most basic way that we could style elements, and this is kind of not looked upon well, this is an older, less robust way of doing it, is within a particular element, we can actually specify a style attribute. And within the style attribute, we can specify individual CSS properties that we want to apply to that element. So for example, let's say I want this div. And this div is just this whole entire thing, by the way, because everything is wrapped, or sorry, not the entire thing, just this test, the H1 and the paragraph. Both of those elements are wrapped inside a div. So I can say div style is equal to background color. We'll say yellow. So it's going to be kind of atrocious looking. But if I refresh, we do indeed see, and this gives you a nice sort of illustration of how far your elements extend in reality. So we can see, even though the CSS test and paragraph text only take up a little bit of width on our page, that div element actually spans the entire block, the entire width of our DOM, right, of our Chrome view. And that's more apparent when you actually end up styling things than it is just by displaying things as is. You might have expected that our page was only as wide as this big block of text. The GIF looks very goofy. I can't read that name. Terrible, terrible color on it. C4ID, person who just followed. Yeah, the GIF is very, it's a little, it's good. It's good. I like the GIF. My GIF is goofier because I actually wasn't present for the shoot on that day. I didn't realize that they were shooting pictures. So if you actually go down to where I am, you can see I don't have a picture here. I have a Muppet where my face should be. So I guess I could have just taken this image right here and used that. But in any case. So this is how you style things in line. So thanks, Ashley, appreciate it. So you can actually specify on a given element in your HTML without needing a style sheet or any separate place to put your styling. I can say style equals and then whatever property that I want. In this case, I decided on a background color of yellow. And I can do the same thing for this H1. I can say style equals color. And so now I'm not doing background color. I'm doing regular color. And what this is going to do is going to style the text itself. I can say color red. And this is going to look terrible. But if I do that, you can indeed see that CSS Test now is showing up as red. So this is the very primitive, basic way that you can. It's a great idea to use this for a team page. This is CO4ID. And then we have Tiny Dynamite 07. Thank you very much for the follow. But this is how you essentially style things in a primitive way. Now another cool thing that we looked at last week was I could say border equals 1 like this on a table, right? And what that ends up doing is it gives us this very old school primitive looking border outline for our table. But there's actually a border CSS style property, though, and we'll take a much closer look at this a little bit later. But I can say border 2 pixel solid green right here. And if I refresh, notice that now our table gets this green outline around the entire thing, just around the table, not around any of the sub-elements. And that's because we've actually applied this just to the table at large, this border. And the way that border works is it just puts a border around that one element, that parent element. It doesn't actually include sub-elements. And that's kind of a difference between using border equals 1 and style equals and then setting a border however you want. But I could very easily set this to be a 10 pixel solid border. And notice that now our border is green and much larger than it was before. And if I did, I think it's dashed. Notice that now we get a very tacky sort of looking dashed green thick outline around our table. But we have a lot more flexibility now. Before we were kind of limited to, oh, border equals 1, either it's on or off, but we get kind of a weird primitive looking outline. And, you know, and it also includes the nested elements, the TDs, the THs, and whatnot, the TRs. In this case, we just get an outline around the entire table, but we could do anything we want with this within the limits of what border allows us to do, right? So this is how you'd use the style tag, or attribute rather. So you can use in any HTML tag whatever style attribute on a given element you want, and then specify as a string this bit of code here. And this is actually, these are actually CSS properties. CSS properties. In this case, border, color, background color, and there's a ton of different properties. Just to give you a sense of how many there are, a website that I think is really great at looking at is the MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network page. And you can go to MDN CSS, for example. Go to here, so developer.mozilla.org/enus, depending on which region of the world you're in, /doc/web/CSS. There's a CSS, so it gives you a nice little high-level overview of what it is. So here we have an introduction, we have tutorials. But if you go over to the CSS reference, and I scroll down here a little bit, these are all the CSS properties that we have access to in the language, the entire language. And there's a ton of them. And we will not be covering, you know, nearly anywhere close to the majority of these. We'll be covering a subset of these that are often used, but there's a ton of properties that you know, most people, I would say, most developers probably don't have them all memorized, even the majority of them memorized, unless you're a CSS fanatic who's been studying for years and has committed them all to memory sort of proactively. It's a great idea to use this for a team page. Should I do it in a separate file or directly in the element? So good question. So we're going to start going more towards a better way of doing this using what are called IDs and classes. And we're going to take a look next at the style tag. So back to my HTML page. I want to get rid of all this stuff, all of the inline properties, or rather the inline, the attribute properties. Let's go ahead and see where I had all of them. And then I think that's it, right? If I'm not mistaken. Nope, here as well. So now I have no more. Now it's just pure HTML. And this is important. Having your HTML separate from your CSS, I think, is ideal so that you can decouple the sort of the layout of your page versus how it looks. I think that way, you can have one person designing the HTML, one person designing the CSS. And there are a lot of other reasons why you might want to do this, which we can take a look at later. The sort of next evolution of how we want to approach adding CSS to our web pages is going to be with this thing called a style tag. And a style tag is usually in the head, actually almost always in the head of your HTML page. And it sort of goes where your script tags often go, which we'll look at that today. But JavaScript often also goes in the head if it's in a script tag, if it's actually built into the HTML page. The style tag is a container where we can place all of our CSS rather than having them be within a particular element. And this is great. So what I can do is, and this is where we actually start getting into our CSS syntax, right? Separate from the properties, which was sort of CSS syntax, but this is much more so CSS syntax. I can say, for example, and we'll use the table as our first example. I can say, whenever there's a table in my HTML page, and I do some curly brackets here, I want basically the same thing that I had before. I want a border that's 10 pixels dashed green, right? And the nice cool thing about VS Code is that actually whenever you write in the context of a CSS page or an HTML page, if you write a CSS color, and in this case it's defined as a word, green, but we'll take a look at how we can maybe define our own colors using either RGB or hex values in a little bit. But we have the word green here, which just means, it's probably something like RGB 02550, which again, that'll make more sense in a little bit. We are doing the exact same thing we did before, but now we have it sort of decoupled from our HTML up here in our style tag. So I'm going to save this, go back to my HTML page, and then refresh. Notice that all of the other CSS is gone, but that table CSS is the exact same. So that's all completely still working the same, only now we've taken it away from our HTML tag, our HTML itself, and we've put it in its own designated location. So we know where all of our styling is. There's no intermingling of CSS and HTML, which can get messy and hard to maintain, and harder for people to sort of collaboratively work on the same source code. Check out the CSS Zen website. It will blow your mind. Yeah, that's an awesome website. I'm a huge fan of that one. So CSS Zen Garden, I believe, is the one. And what it does is it shows this page here, right, by default, and a bunch of other pages. So I can go, for example, this page here, which, OK, this is cool, right? We have another page with some other content, right? And then I can go, for example, back to that last page. I can go here. There's another page, right? OK, this is cool, right? So we have another page, showcasing some CSS, some pretty cool stuff. I'll go back to maybe another page just to get a sense of what this looks like. OK, this is pretty cool. This kind of looks industrial, OK, some pretty cool content. So a pretty cool, nice showcase of a bunch of different sites, right? But the funny thing is that these are actually all the exact same site. They just have different CSS applied to them. They're all the exact same site. And this is a great sort of representation of what you can accomplish with CSS, just CSS. Nothing else has changed except for the CSS. You can see this paragraph right here, how it says, a demonstration of what can be accomplished through CSS-based design. Select any style sheet from the list to load it into this page. And then notice that this says, a demonstration of what can be accomplished through CSS-based design. Select any style sheet from the list to load it into this page. It's the exact same content. Only thing we've changed is the CSS. So if you've been curious about how important CSS actually is in terms of what it does for your website, it's pretty important. It encompasses all that goes into making your site look different from any other website. So this is CSS Zen Garden, a great way to gain some appreciation for CSS. Is this the Atom editor or the CS50 workspace via the website, says Time Dynamite? This is VS Code. So an awesome free text editor. You can download it by going to, don't remember the website offhand, code.visualstudio.com. And this will allow you to download VS Code for your operating system. Highly recommended. You can also download Atom or Sublime Text. How to have the same style on, say, 7 text boxes using external CSS and greetings from India, says Nikhil0211. Good question. That's actually a very easy thing to do, and we'll take a look at that when we start getting into separate style sheets. But suffice to say, you can just say text area like that, and then do some style that you want inside of the CSS, and we can maybe demonstrate this in a little bit. But because we've said text area, this is just this is what's called a selector, right? So let me delete this. So back to where we were before. This table word is a selector. And what a selector does is, depending on how you've defined your selector, it goes through the entire web page, top to bottom, and it selects all of the things that match what you've said in that selector. For example, table. All I said is literally table. And if it has no syntax in front of it, if it's just literally the word, then that means it's an HTML element. So in this case, table, I've said the word table, which means get me any HTML table and apply this style to it. So to demonstrate this, if I decide to copy and paste this table down here below, right? First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just comment this out. And a way to do commenting in CSS, which is different than HTML, is to do it like in C, where you can do /* and then */. So where you want the comment to begin, /*, and then where you want the, in this case, // and then where you want the comment to end, */. So the slashes are kind of like the container, and then the stars kind of go inside of the container. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. So we can see that we have no more border around our table, our first table, right? But I have 2 tables here, right? Not just 1 table. So if I go back to my page and then I uncomment this bit of code here out, notice that we're saying table, and what I'm positing is that this should apply to all tables, because we're not being specific about any one table. I'm just saying all tables should have a border of 10 pixels dashed green. If I go back to my page and I refresh, indeed, we do see that it doesn't apply just to the first table. It gets both tables and applies a border around them. And to Nikhil's question, how to have the same style on 7 text boxes, you would do just this. You would define 7 text boxes, and the sort of the naive-ish way, which we've done so far, is just use it based on the element type, which is totally fine for a lot of cases. But you would just define 7 different text boxes, and then you would just have a text area selector, and then that would encompass all 7 of them, just by virtue of the fact that it's going to look for all of the text areas, the text boxes, if that makes sense. So this is cool. Using selectors, we can grab all of the given element of a particular type. I have 2 divs in my HTML page, so I can illustrate this with divs as well. I can say div, and then maybe I want a background color of yellow, right? So using very simple attributes or properties right now. But I have 2 divs. So I have this CSS test with this paragraph, and then I have this is a second block, and here's a little more text, right? So if I refresh, notice that we do indeed have yellow going around our entire element. And also, which I didn't realize until now, both the tables themselves were inside this div. So notice that the tables themselves actually got a yellow background. And this is part of what makes CSS cascading. So what happens is we applied it to the div element, right? But what that does is not only does it style the div element, but it also includes all of the children of the div element. So for example, in this case, div is a parent element to this h1 and this p tag, right? They're inside the div, just like this, kind of like puzzle pieces nestled inside of another puzzle piece, like we've seen in Scratch. The div, when it gets a style, depending on what the style is, right? A border doesn't necessarily apply in the same way, but for example, a background color does. The background color actually applies also to this h1 and to this p tag, right? Because they're inside the div. They're children. It's a cascading effect. You get this ripple effect that goes down from the parent to the children. And it applies to the same thing here with this div. It not only makes the background of the h2 and the p yellow, it also makes the tables both yellow. Their background's also yellow. Check out Robbie Lenardi's interactive portfolio, says Zanark. Let me see. Robbie Lenardi. Is it this one? Interactive resume. Oh, this is cool. Website about my illustration works. It contains websites, infographics, and animation projects. Huh. OK. He has 3 different places that say launch the website. OK. This is cool. So I'm guessing this is a good amount of JavaScript. Yeah, this looks like JavaScript. It's really cool, though. I'm a huge fan. So you can see when we get to a certain point, the elements, so you can almost sort of envision these I guess, I don't know how you would describe it, rows of cards as having a position. And depending on where we are in the website, they have maybe their X or Y moves left or right. And it's kind of similar to what we would do in a game. He has a little monkey hand here, and I'm guessing that has some rotation applied to it, depending on where we are in the website. So these animations themselves, these little windows have like a keyframe or a frame in their animation that also changes depending on which position we're at in the CSS. And this may be CSS. I'm inclined to think that it's probably JavaScript, especially this slide down bit here. But there's a lot you can accomplish with just CSS animations, so I won't say definitively either way what I presume it to be. But my inclination is that there's probably some JavaScript here. And it won't be terribly easy to see just what has JavaScript by looking at the console, actually. But yeah, no, super cool. There's a lot you can do. Once we've gone past having just HTML and we go to CSS and we start including CSS animations and more importantly JavaScript, then I mean the sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want with your website. As long as you can sort of think it, you can implement it one way or another, right? This is kind of cool. There's so depending on where your mouse cursor is on this div here, it actually shifts it left or right. And he has what's called parallax. So there's different layers that move at different speeds. This is something called parallax. So these octopi and the mushrooms move slower than the bushes in the background, which move slower than that island. And this is something we actually look at in our games class. In our Flappy Bird lecture, I think is the first lecture we look at, where you see the bird, the Flappy Bird moving, and the pipes moving. Or rather, Flappy Bird always stays centered, but the pipes move, and that makes it look as if Flappy Bird is moving. And then you have a background in the distance that's moving even slower. That's what's called parallax scrolling, and it's to sort of make the human eye think that there's depth when there's not. All these are is just a series of images. Everything is completely flat, but as soon as we move left or right a little bit, and things move at different speeds, it tricks the human eye into thinking that there's actually depth there. So really cool effect that can be applied. So anyway, thank you very much, Zanark, for plugging that. It was cool to look at that. Do web developers get visual design lessons, says Asley. I think it depends on who you are, what you're doing. I think visual design is something that's worthwhile. I haven't gotten any visual design formally speaking. You can, I think, teach yourself a lot just by looking, for example, at what we're doing here, looking at websites and sort of analyzing what they've done, getting some inspiration, trying things out, getting feedback, and learning organically. But taking a UX class, I think, could certainly benefit, I think, a lot of people. And I think I could benefit from it a lot, too, especially as I get more into web development. I'm more into games, and I try to look at games that I've played and see things that I've enjoyed and get information and inspiration from that. But I think everybody learns a little bit differently. But anyways, great, cool little aside there. I'm going to go back to our page here, make sure I haven't missed any comments. Oh, yeah, so Zanark plugged the interactive. Yeah, really cool virtual resume. Alex, what games do you play these days? I've been into modded Minecraft recently, Enigmatica 2, an expert pack that I've been having a lot of fun with. Before that, I was playing a little bit of Oxygen Not Included, and tried briefly some RimWorld, but not terribly much. I'm very interested in Wargroove, which just came out, which is sort of like an Advance Wars Fire Emblem style game, but haven't had time to play that too much yet. So cool. We have now the ability to style arbitrarily numbered, depending on how many we have. We can have an arbitrary number of the same element and style all of them at the same time. But what if I want to style, for example, this table, this first table, to have a green border, but this second table, maybe I want it to have a red border. So I want it to be a little bit different. Play Fortnite, LOL, says Zanark. I did play Fortnite. But that's a time sink. I don't think I'm willing to dedicate that much time to playing Fortnite anymore. the problem is that here we've basically said that all of our tables, because we've said just table, all of our tables should have a border of 10 pixels dashed green. But I don't want all of our tables. I want only some of our tables. Or specifically, I want my first table to be green and my second table to be red. So how can we do that? And there's an awesome thing, a couple of things in CSS and HTML called IDs and classes. So what I can do is I can say, OK, I want this table to be green table. And I want this table to have the ID of red table. So that's not going to do anything right off the bat. And in fact, I think if I rerun this, they should function identically. Nothing's changed. For the sake of everyone's vision, I'm going to get rid of the background color yellow bit here. I don't think that's really doing anybody any services. So there we go. We're back to our green borders. But now we need to use a little bit of different syntax. So we created an ID in our HTML. So this is something you need to do in your HTML. And now we need to map to it in our CSS. So what I can do is I can say green table with a hash mark. So notice that I'm saying hash green table. And this just means anything that has the green table ID, that's the hash mark is the ID, I'm going to specify that that should have the 10 pixel dashed green border. And if I want the same thing to happen for my red table, I need to specify a 10 pixel dashed red border there, right? And I can actually get rid of this table tag now, because I don't really want anything at the moment uniformly done to all my tables. I just want my green table and my red table. The ID should only be used once. Classes can be used many times, says Jaban. Correct. That is correct. Now notice that in the style of Christmas, we do have a green dashed border around the first table, which we gave the ID green table. And the second table now has a red border around it in the vein of the red table ID. And to Jaban's point, yes, this is correct. IDs should only be used one time. You should have one specific element that has an ID. And if you want, for example, maybe I wanted a couple of green tables, right? Let me go ahead and copy. Maybe I want a couple of red tables. So I'm going to copy this table here and paste it down below. And now I have an ID in both places, but that's not really canonical. And actually, offhand, I don't know if that'll work. That'll still work. So you can still have two things have the same ID. And that it works fine, but it's not good practice. Typically, what you'll do is instead, you use what's called a class. And a class is meant to be used across multiple elements. Multiple elements that share the same physical characteristics. So both of these tables have the class red table. And maybe this we can change to class as well. However, it's not going to work anymore because the class actually has a different syntax for us to use it as a selector. So remember, this table selector was for all tables. This is an ID selector, but we need a class selector. So in order to make a class selector, all you have to simply do is change the hash to a dot. So now instead of hash green table, hash red table, we say dot green table, dot red table. We go back to our page. Now we have a green table and then two red tables, just like that. So very easy. It's not only bad practice, it's against the spec, and things can break, says trollolol ha ha ha. So good point. And I haven't delved too deeply into the exact situation where it can break, but I imagine that being the case. But yeah, generally, as a general rule, don't use the ID in multiple places. Only use it in one location. Use classes where you would use IDs. What's the usage of ID, says Nuwanda3333. Just where you have one element that's just gets its styling or JavaScript applied to that one thing. Classes are for a range of things, but if you wanted, and to be fair, you could use classes for things that only have one use case too. An ID, I think semantically, you can derive that there's only one instance of something in particular that has an ID versus a class. If something has a class, then people may use it in multiple locations, where even if you intended for it to only be used one time. So ID just kind of tells you or your developer friends, like, oh, this should only happen to one thing, right? But you could use class everywhere that you use ID. And it looks like Alex Gabrielov says thinks that people rarely use ID. I mean, I've seen ID in a good number of places, but it depends, I think, on your use case. I use IDs, names, classes, and mixes, says Juban3. Yeah, you'll use ID, you'll use class. It depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. Cool, cool. If anybody has questions thus far on anything we've talked about, let me know. IDs are useful as anchor tags. Yeah, in a lot of cases, you won't have the same anchor tag in multiple places. You'll typically only have it as one particular thing. The front-end designer at my last internship did the same, and our mentor sat and explained why it's a bad practice. Yeah, no, it makes sense. OK, so classes and IDs, we understand how that works. We looked at the style tag, which is great. We looked at selectors. Now, let's go ahead and maybe get a little bit more fancy with our HTML. So maybe I want to style. Here, we'll do this. We'll say at the very top of my page, I'm going to have an H1 that says CS50 on Twitch. I'm going to change this H1 to be an H2, because generally you should only have one H1 in your application. Tom Balator kindly explained in the last stream how this affects certain people with accessibility issues, maybe blind people that are reading through a particular reader and they want to get to the header of the page. If there's multiple headers, multiple H1s, this can be a source of ambiguity. So try to use only one H1 for your entire web page if possible. I'm going to say maybe I want an H2 outside of my divs that says a show about implementing stuff from scratch. If I refresh the page, you can see that we have H2s of different use cases. We have one in our outside of our sort of divs. Then we have the ones that are inside the divs. So CSS Test is an H2 inside of our div. This is a second block is an H2 inside of our div. But a show about implementing stuff from scratch is an H2 outside of our div. Now, if I wanted, for example, an easy way to just say, I want all the H2s inside the divs to look like, maybe I want them to be blue, right? Background color, blue. Actually, I wonder if there's any good color. Is there like a dark blue? Yeah, there is dark blue. So this is a cool thing. You can actually, in VS Code, kind of start typing colors. And it will give you a list of all the colors that start with that letter, in case you forgot. Like, for example, dark blue, dark cyan, dark goldenrod. I'm gonna use dark red, actually. I like dark red's cool. It's kind of similar to the crimson color at Harvard or for CS50's webpage. Can you please give us a brief explanation of less? Can you explain what that is? I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to. IDs are useful as anchor tags. Okay, so classes are not children of the table element, correct? The classes are not children of the table element, correct. The classes are separate. So the classes are ways of tagging stuff in our HTML body so that we can tie styling to them from our CSS. The elements themselves are the only things that are children, right? The elements can have classes to them, and by virtue of being children to other elements, that can cause certain interactions with your CSS. But they themselves are not children. The classes themselves are not children. The classes are essentially tags that you use to mark things for styling purposes. Less is a type of preprocessor. I'm actually not too familiar with it. Let me see. Less preprocessor. Less.js. Oh, so kind of like Sass. It's CSS, but just a little more. So it has variables like Sass does, except here they use the at symbol instead of the $sign. That's pretty cool. Mixing a bunch of properties from one rule set into another rule set. That's cool. You can, okay, so you add the rule sets from another thing with the dot and then the parentheses, kind of like a function call. You can nest. Yeah, this is, it's similar to Sass. So I know about Sass. I don't know it in detail. Look at Sass or CSS. Syntactically awesome style sheets. This, I think, is the more popular CSS preprocessor that's used. But I'm sure Less probably has a lot of traction as well. Will we cover Sass in the future, says Zanark? Probably. I know that Brian knows Sass. I'll ask him if he wants to do one, but if anything, maybe I'll do one in the future. I'd need to study Sass a little bit in detail and learn it pretty well. Browsers want to render even incorrect pages in order not to fail to their competitors. So even incorrect HTML, they try to interpret. Too many of them out there. Yes, that's true. HTML will be as generous as it possibly can. And even if you have incorrect tags and incorrect syntax, it's not going to throw up an error in the web browser. It's going to go as far down as it possibly can and interpret as much as possible, and then fail sort of silently. So this can be a difficult way to track bugs and to debug your websites if you sort of have a oddly placed incorrect tag or style or whatnot. But there are pros and cons to this approach. Certainly, it would suck to just have the web page fail altogether and crash, right? Class is an attribute to an HTML tag. Yes, that's correct. Try the Indian red color, says Zanark. Sure, we can do that. Let me go up to where we have our thing here. So dashed, or sorry, rather Indian red. Oh, it goes kind of like a salmon color, sort of. Let's render this. Right, let's get back to a little bit back on track here. So we have this Indian red color now, and also I should shout out all of our our followers. Zanark, I think I got you, but thank you for following. KB2201, Athel CA, Humble Pie, and Razfan Sfat. Thank you very much for following. So our goal, as we stated before, was not to have the all of our H2s rendering with this new color, in this case Indian red. We just want all of the H2s that are inside of our divs to have this coloring, right? And so the cool thing we can actually do is, rather than just saying H2, because remember, it's going to go through the entire HTML page and get every single H2 regardless of where it is, I can instead say div H2. And what this will do is it'll say within any div, that H2 inside of the div, so the child goes to the right of that, I want that to have that color. And if we go back to our page and refresh, notice that now we do indeed get the behavior that we expected or that we wanted in the first place. The nested H2s now have the colorization. Our top level H2 does not. And if I go back up here and I say maybe I want that H2 to have a background color of, let's see if there are any interesting A colors, aquamarine, right? Let's say I want that color there. I can do that, and that will work just fine. And now notice that I actually have two different ways of specifying an H2 and how we should color it. We have an H2 that's top level, and then we have an H2 that's inside of a div. The more specific one is going to win out, typically speaking. And I think this is regardless of where it's placed. And this is where my inexperience with CSS kind of comes into play. But if I'm not mistaken, the more specific one should still win out, even if we refresh. And it does. So even though this H2 is defined below the div H2 selector, now remember, the selector just means anything here that's before the curly bracket. Because this is more specific, we're basically saying an H2 inside of a div rather than just an H2. Whatever is more specific will generally win out in terms of which one, how should we style our tag, right? It could have been interpreted either way. We could have interpreted that because this is just an H2, right? Or rather, because these are just H2s, period, and we have an H2 selector after my div H2 selector, maybe everything should just be, aquamarine. But no, because these are more specifically defined as div H2, those actually take priority over the regular H2 selector. And you can nest as far down as you want to go. I could have, I could have another div inside of here with a UL. Within the UL, maybe it has some LIs that have tables within them, and those tables have paragraphs. And you can go nesting deep down more and more. But that can get a little bit complicated, and that's why it's often good to use classes, because you can just tag things with classes and not worry about their hierarchy within your page. And because you use classes, you can move things around, and it's flexible, right? We're just going to the tag. We're not really worried too much about where its position is relative to its parent element. Lovely Girl T, thank you very much for the follow. Anybody has any questions on that, definitely let me know. I'm going to try and catch up with all the comments here. Apparently there is a naming convention called block element modifier, BEM. Let me take a look. I'm not sure what that is. Block element modifier, BEM. Form theme, Christmas, form simple. Okay. So it looks like a convention. I'd have to, I think, tinker with it a little bit and see a couple code bases for it, but that's interesting. This is the first time I've actually seen this. Thanks for bringing that up. It will compile into CSS anyway, referring to Sass, says Alex. Yeah, Sass, any of those preprocessors end up just getting converted to regular CSS down the line, which is the same way that like transpiled, like CoffeeScript gets transpiled to JavaScript in the end, and ES6 gets transpiled, or used to get transpiled into ES5. Now a lot of browsers can just run native ES6 JavaScript. Same idea. Bavignite says, CS50 Beyond Day 0 evening session, Brian talked about Sass. It is like a compiler to generate a CSS file from a Sass file. Yeah, he did actually, and let me go ahead and plug that. So cs50.ly/beyond. So you can go ahead there. Oh, okay, the chat got cleared. I thought I took that macro off. It's just that it wouldn't do that. That's annoying. There we go. So the comments just got cleared off the screen because I thought I took that keyboard macro off, but I guess I didn't. Sorry about that if your comment was just on the screen right now. Flood the chat with comments so that we get our text box back up here. And then it feels a little bit empty without it now. I personally don't use these there we go, Xanar says first. I personally don't use these pre-processors and go for raw CSS myself, says Jabon3. Yeah, I mean, if you understand the raw CSS, I think ultimately you have more, I think, power and flexibility. There's a lot of cool things like the variables that Sass gives you and stuff like that that makes it more flexible, more powerful. And I think that's ultimately why people use those pre-processed versions of CSS. But as long as you can get a page done at the end of the day, that's what really matters. AnsDR, thank you very much for following. And thanks for everybody for filling up that chat. The JP guy is wishing Asli a happy birthday since last month. Yeah, everybody shout out Asli for her birthday. You can use exclamation point or bang important to overrule. Yes, says Jabon3. So we can do, that's a good point. I can say, maybe I want this aquamarine to work regardless of the, and I thought it was, oh wait, nope, sorry. It goes here. I can have this background color aquamarine important. And what this will do is whenever it says an H2, this particular property will take priority regardless of that indentation level. So if I go back here and I refresh the page, notice that we do indeed get an overridden background color. So if you absolutely want to make sure that the browser is not interpreting priority for you, and you want, if you have a bunch of different kinds of selectors for the same elements, and you want something to 100% be a given element, and you've lost track, use the bang important to override based on the priority level of that element. In this case, regardless of whether it's nested in something else, the priority is not considered, so the bang important, exclamation point important, is going to override that. Good point from Jubon3. We can do this to div h2, a, and p. Yes, Xanark. And actually, I have to remember offhand that particular. I believe that is that's when it comes sequentially afterwards, not as a parent. So if I, for example, wanted a in that particular case, that's a div that comes before an H2, which comes before an A, which comes before a P, but they have the same parent element, right? So, and let me just verify 100% that that's the case. CSS greater than, I believe that's correct. immediate children. Oh, it's immediate children, not siblings. OK. Oh, direct descendants. Right. OK. So in this case, for example, the difference would be, let's say I have this. So there's a div here and an h2. But let's say within my div, maybe I have another div. Right? And within here, maybe this has another h2, which says this is a nested h2. And let's refresh the page. And notice that even though this div had an h2, which had a div which had an h2. Oh, actually, well, this is kind of a OK, this is a poor illustration. Let's say that this is actually a ul. And the ul has an h2, or rather an li that has an h2. The other one was kind of a poor example because that itself was a div that had an h2, so it doesn't illustrate the point that I'm trying to illustrate. But notice that now instead of another div with an h2, we have a ul which has an h2 within it. We have a ul which is an unordered list, which has an li which has an h2. So with the prior selector, we might think, oh, this is a div. It'll just find an h2 that's directly inside of a div. But it doesn't work that way. CSS will actually, it'll actually look through the div, this top element, this div element, and anywhere inside of it where it finds an h2, it'll apply the styling. But if we only want it to be just the h2 right after the div, not any of the elements that are deeper nested inside of that, to what Zen said was you use this greater than symbol, and what that does is it makes only the direct child, that direct h2, styled in that way. So that's an excellent point that Zen brought up. And I don't think I actually even was going to cover that in today's thing. I think I neglected to add that to my notes. So excellent thing to bring up. Thank you, Zen for doing that. ID has the highest specificity level, I think, says Alex Gabrielov. That makes sense, especially if the typical use case is for one specific thing in your entire web page to have that behavior. That makes complete sense to me. How would you color a specific row of a table based on computation done at the server side, specifically when the row position that needs to be highlighted is not fixed? Is there like a Jinja for CSS? You would just put that into your Jinja. Well, I guess it depends on the use case that you're talking about. You can just write the CSS in your Jinja, I believe. So let me think about this. So for example, if you had on your server, if you had a row and maybe you're spitting out all of the entries in your database. Maybe it's users or whatever. Maybe some of the users are admins or mods or something, but it's not in order. You could say, and I'm a little bit rusty with my Flask here. Oops. But if you, for example, had, and I don't recall offhand if this is correct, but you would say for user in users. Right, and then I think it's end4 or something like that. And then let's say up here we had table, and then I'm going to just indent this here, and just for thoroughness, we'll do t-head, t-head, t-body, t-body, and then here. We'll do this. So for a user in users, we would say tr. We're going to create a new tr, and then td would be user.name or user.name, assuming that our t-head had in our thing up here, it's th name, right, and then th maybe status, right. And so you would do td username and then td user status. It would just look something like this. And I apologize if the Flask syntax isn't completely appropriate. it may be, I forget offhand if maybe some of these need like that, like the bracket %, but I'm going purely off of memory at this point. But you would say for user and users, you're iterating over all the users that you're feeding into your Jinja template via Flask. Then you would say, you would create your TRs for every user, but then you would, depending on where you want the styling, maybe on at the TR level, you would say style equals, or rather, you would say class equals, I guess you could say, I guess here you could say if user dot status equals admin or whatever. And I think you can do this in Jinja. And I apologize for the people that don't know what Jinja is. Jinja if statement. I think you can just compare. Oh, see, it looks like even. Oh yeah, if key is, you would say you do is, not equals equals. But you would say like that. If user.status is admin, class equals, and I guess here is where you would put your class, right? You would say class equals admin user, and then end if, like that. And so here you're dynamically injecting the class into your HTML that you're generating through Jinja. And this would be something, this would be what it would look like in a nutshell. I'm not offhand 100% sure if this is the exact syntax, but this would be very similar to that. Oh yeah, and Bavik saying for, yeah, you would need the, you'd need this for the for loop as well. And then actually, yeah, and I think the, I think here is where you use the double bracket. Like when you want to just add a variable name, but no for loop, no if statement, etc., then you just do the bracket thing here. Again, this is Jinja. This is completely unrelated, but this is a good question. Injecting CSS dynamically based on a server-side calculation or serving data from a database, you would do something like this. You would look at you would basically put this in between an if statement in your Jinja, and then Jinja dynamically would look at this and evaluate this and only add this class to this row if this if statement evaluated to true, right? So excellent question. Something that's very important, I think, when you're serving static, or when you're serving dynamic web pages from a server, from a database, an excellent thing to consider. So Knitman118 asked that question, so thank you. I want to learn ASP.NET. Can you give me some good resources from which I can learn .NET? Asks Nikhil0211. I don't know almost anything about ASP.NET. I would say just Google for online documentation, books, tutorials on YouTube, etc., and look at that. You can use the selector of nth. Jiban3. Yeah, nth would work, but not if the number is indeterminate. Like the question was posited such that the server is providing us in an arbitrary order some status or some different rows. For that, and that's kind of dependent on how our server is sending the information, it would be hard to calculate that using just nth child, right, or nth of type. It wouldn't work. You would need to do some sort of injection of classes at the template level, which was why he had that question. There's a pretty good game for learning CSS selectors. Flukeout.github.io. Let's take a look at that. Flukeout.github.io. Ah, interesting. Help, I'm stuck. Type in a, oh, OK, we have to actually select the place. Select all elements of type A. Type refers to the type of tag, so div, p, and ul are all different element types. Div selects all div elements. P selects all p elements. So what we want to do is select the plates. OK, so type in a CSS selector, so plate in this case. Enter. Cool. Awesome. Select the bento boxes. OK. And in this case, we would type bento, because I want to select the bento boxes. It shows the HTML here on the right side. So it's just basically just getting them by tag name. So I can enter that. Cool. OK. All right. And there's 32 levels. So yeah, the cool idea. Flukeout.github.io if anybody wants to practice their selectors. Thank you for that suggestion, Alex. CSS has variables now. You can access and modify them with JavaScript too, unlike Sass variables. It says Kim SH. Interesting. CSS variables. As of 2018, oh, it looks like they do. Ah, the dash dash. OK, that's pretty cool. And then it takes in a var keyword. I've actually got no experience with this at all, so this is interesting. Is this supported amongst all browsers currently? Does this have browser? Let me see, browser compatibility. Now, of course, IE doesn't, but it looks like all of the other major browsers do. Chrome for Android, Samsung Internet look like they have kind of not the greatest var support, and Env actually looks like it's got limited support from Edge, Opera, Android, Edge, mobile. But I mean, if you're on in Safari, that looks fine. If you're on modern web browsers like Chrome or Firefox, etc., I think you stand a decent chance of getting all this to work. I'd have to look at this a little bit more in detail, but that's really cool. I mean, I think CSS has been in need of variables for a long time, hence why we have preprocessors that do it, that are arguably more widely used in industry than regular raw CSS. But yeah, thank you for the information there, Kim SH. Much appreciated. JP guy says, I'm surprised Bavik isn't here. And then immediately afterwards, Bavik says, greater than is for the children, not grandchildren. That's funny. Do you use Emmet in VS Code? You should try it. It will make scripting faster. I personally love Emmet. I haven't looked too much into it. I've seen it. I've heard of it. Emmet in VS Code. Snippet expansions for all kinds of stuff. Oh, I see. I have seen this before. Yeah, no, this is really cool. I haven't used it, and I don't use it, but I should definitely look into it. I appreciate that. For those unfamiliar, basically you can specify a shorthand for like an arbitrarily nested bit of HTML or CSS, and it will, like right here, it's saying UL, ULI *3 span.hello, which is a class, and then $ to end, and it blows it out into a full HTML document so that it's just a really nice, if you get really good at it, really fast at it, you can write in a whole HTML document. Super awesome. It's really cool. Yeah, I should definitely use that more. It would be nice if the YouTube comments also appeared in the chat. I don't know if it's possible to do that with OBS, to be honest, JP. Yeah, we encourage people to come to the Twitch video just so that we have everybody all together. I'm not sure if there's a way to solve that using OBS by itself. I'll try and look into it, though. It would be nice if the YouTube comment, okay, with a different color scheme, still in real time, and the screen would get flooded. Yeah, no, I mean, it would, but that's not a bad thing. I think the more chat is better. I think it's cool for people to share ideas. I hate preprocessors, says Colton. Do you like it? I think preprocessors are cool. I think that understanding how it works at the lowest level is important, but unless you're referring to to Jinja. But I don't know if there's a better way to do it outside of Jinja, to be honest. I think it's kind of hard to avoid using some sort of templating engine on the server side. JP is saying that bracket is Django, bracket % is Flask. I thought Jinja also used bracket just for variables, though, if I'm not mistaken. What is Jinja? It's a way for you to serve from your server for you to send HTML that you inject data into, depending on the variables that you either query from the database or the user provides. Basically interact like a way to dynamically generate HTML. Was that Django or Flask? That was Flask, and specifically it was Jinja templating in the context of Flask. Thank you for Mabel P 2006 for the follow. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody else here. Apologize if I did. AnsDR I think I got, and then Cryptics and Mabel P 2006. Thank you very much. A lot of frameworks use similar styles, says Martin. Could you close the downloads? Wait, I'm not sure. Is it on my computer? Oh, sorry. Cat.jpg. Good point. var name usually put in the root. Also on the ASP question, you can learn about ASP.NET Core through Microsoft courses on edX here. Oh, JP guy plugged some ASP stuff in the chat there, so take a look at that. I don't see Iceweasel. Oh, I don't see Iceweasel. What is Iceweasel? Bob Tabor has good courses on ASP.NET/C#. David.com on his page, but I think you can find some courses from him on MVA too. And that was courtesy of XYZ92. OK. And then Zanark saying, get some sleep. Did mention right before, this one's different from that on OpenEd. Awesome. OK, cool. Thanks, Zanark. Have a good sleep. We'll catch you on the next stream. All right, so we've gotten through classes, IDs, style tags, selectors. Let's talk about colors a little bit, because we haven't really talked too much about that, and it's kind of important. I'm actually going to pull up a color palette tool. And I think this is the one. I might need a different one. Oh, this is OK. Let's try this one out. Do not want to watch a tutorial. This one, I don't know about this one. Maybe this one will work. Let me see. Is there a way to do this in a? So what's the generate button here? This is not the one that I was going to use. This is the first result. Oh, spacebar. Oh, that one's ugly. That one's kind of cool. I like this one. OK, so we'll use this one. So what we're looking at here is a color palette. A color palette is a set of colors that we purposefully limit ourselves to using for visual consistency. This is very popular in game design for retro game development, and even modern game development uses this to a certain degree. But a color palette just helps you make sure that everything that you do looks similar, looks it looks nice, it's pleasant. You choose colors that compare and contrast well. It doesn't hurt your eyes as you're looking through things. And super handy for a consistently nice appearance for your website. So what we're doing here is we're looking at a set of 5 colors that this website has very kindly provided to us. And at the bottom of each of these colors is a hex code. And so a hex code is just a series of digits in what's called hexadecimal. So it's related to binary. It's binary is base 2, hexadecimal is base 16. Every 2 numbers in hex is 8 numbers together in binary. So a byte in binary maps to 2 numbers in hex. So 255 values, 256 values, 0 to 255. And we use this in the context of CSS quite a lot, actually. So let's go ahead and use these colors. I like these colors quite a bit. I'm going to do is I'm going to say body gets the background color of let's make it dark. Let's do a dark theme web page. So I'm actually going to use this color here, which is hash 272635. 272635. And VS Code has kindly given me a little bit of a preview. And what's cool about this is, again, the hex digits map to a binary byte, 8 bits, right? In this case, 27 is a byte that encompasses all of the red that we have in our color. 26 encompasses all of the green that we have in our color, and 35 encompasses all of the blue that we have in our color. And this is called RGB. And you might have heard of RGB before, and you might have even heard it in the context of CS50, where we use it to teach about, in the context of the recover p set, where every pixel on the screen has an RGB value. The amount of red light, the amount of green light, and the amount of blue light coming out of the pixel. When the colors match up, when they mix together, it produces a new color that's a sum of all 3 of those components, those RGB components. In this case, these 3 components are actually pretty similar, 27, 26, and 35. And they're a bit on the low side. It goes from 0, 0 up to FF. So it goes, because it's a base 16 number, when we have a base 10 number, we have 10 digits, 0 to 9. When we have a base 16 number, right, we get to our 10th digit, and we still need another 6 numbers, right? So we need A, B, C, D, E, and F. We use those just arbitrarily to designate the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th digit in hexadecimal. So A is 1 more than 9, B is 1 more than A, et cetera, et cetera. And then when we get to F and we want to go to the next digit over and we loop over, sort of carrying the 1, this becomes 0, right? It goes back to 0, and then the other one becomes 1. And so this is the equivalent of the value 16. 10 is the equivalent of the value 16. somewhat confusingly maybe if you're brand new to numbering, different numbering systems besides decimal. Now, this is a common convention for designating colors, so we're going to illustrate it here. I'm going to use that as the background color because I want this dark theme. And for the H2s, maybe I'll use this light blue. So it's B1, E5, F2, right? So we'll use, and then let's go back to my page just so I remember what it looks like. So I want all of my H2s to be, well, actually, let's make our H1 the, we'll make it this kind of light, very pallid gray color. That's E8, E9, F3, right? So, and this doesn't take background color. This just takes regular color. We're coloring the text itself now. So this that's E8, E8, E9, F3, right? And it gets a nice dynamic color injected right into there. And then we'll go back here, and let's say I want my kind of our aquamarine color for the H2s, B1, E5, F2. Remember how, let's see how I want this to look. I want the, well, first let's say the paragraphs. I want the paragraphs to have a color. The paragraphs will be this more dark gray color, which is actually nicely CE, CE, CE. So pretty high up, right? And if all the components are kind of the same, the R, the G, and the B are the same color, it's going to be in the gray spectrum somewhere. F, 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 F is completely 255 on all three components. And so the way that color works, adding all three of those components together gives us pure white. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 would be pure black. Colton, 1987, you explained very clearly. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you think so. So let's go over to let's say all of our p tags, right? I'm just gonna use the p selector for all of the p tags. I want them all to be. I'm not gonna worry too much about where they're nested, etc. I'm just gonna use all of them. So CE, CE, CE. That'll be our p tag, and then let's get rid of the background color for the H2. Get rid of the background color for the completely H2 selector, and then maybe get rid of the table backgrounds as well. And then let's just give all H2s a consistent color of A6, A6, A8. That's fine. So we'll say color A6, A6, A8. Right. And we'll see what this looks like as we, let me go back over here and refresh. Cool, OK. So we're in a better direction, right? Everything looks OK. It's not fantastic. It needs some work. But one thing that we do need to do, actually, though, is the border text needs to be updated a little bit, actually. So let's go ahead and say color for the border is going to also be the same as the p tag. So we'll say this. This should apply to the border text. Nope, it did not. So instead, I'm going to say TD and TH, and that will do it. Now, this is something that I didn't illustrate before, was I was actually able to comment a selector. I was able to say TDs and THs should both be given the same attributes, right? And this is something that you can put as many of these as you want within these commas. And you could also do something like this, right? You could say TD greater than H2, comma, TH. You can chain your selectors as arbitrarily complicated as you want. So the first two digits is for the red color, e.g. 27, and the intensity of the red is from 0 to FF max. Oh, and then David's actually still in the chat, and he's pitching in there and saying that that is correct. Yes, that is indeed correct. And another way that you can actually look at this is, rather than needing this color hex code here, this hexadecimal sort of, sextet, is that how you would say that? This 6-digit number. You could instead say RGB and then pass in 3 values from 0 to 255. So, and I don't know what this would be exactly. This looks like it's a bit higher on the spectrum. So we'll say 212 for all of them. So, and that's roughly the right color, I can see based on the preview. And this is maybe a little bit easier to read and to sort of think about. RGB, in the context of CSS, you need to use this RGB word. And it's kind of like a function in C or JavaScript. And it takes in these parentheses. And then you pass in the 3 values from R to G to B in that order specifically. In this case, we passed in 212 to all 3. In the RGB function, it's in decimal form. It's not in hexadecimal anymore, so it does go between 0 and 255, not from 0 to FF. So let's go ahead over here, refresh, and everything looks more or less the same. Maybe it could use a little bit more brightness. And so in order to get it closer to white, all I need to do is just increase those 3 values a little bit more. And it does indeed get a little bit larger. Let me see. Zenark says, good night, everybody. Good night. Good to see you. I think I need to change the font color now, says Indra. Yeah, you might be right. You might be right. Love this color palette site, says that chat cat. Yeah, color palettes are very important. Dark mode is always the best. Earlier with yellow, it was too bright and it was a pain for the eyes. Yeah, well, we were just trying to illustrate the basic principles. We're actually going to start going towards slightly better looking content now. And thank you, Riemann1/2 and Piemes very much for the follow. VS Code is trying to install an update. Nope, not right now. OK, Linz Pitagora says, augment the font size, so increase the font size. We can absolutely do that. And that's something that we haven't really looked at too much. But that's in my next sort of section of things that we can look at. So before, when we were using and actually, I think now we'll defer the actual separate style sheet for a few minutes from now. But what we've been doing so far is kind of saying to let CSS take care of the font size for us, depending on what sort of heading size we were using, right? Whether we're using an H1 or an H2 or an H3 or a P tag. These are all sort of predefined sizes that HTML takes care of us, CSS takes care of us. By default, the browser's font size is 16 pixels for non-heading text. And you can relatively scale that using what's called rem. And we'll take a look at that a little bit later. For now, we're just going to use regular pixel size. But if I want to override, for example, what the H1's font size is, all I have to do is just say font size. And here I can maybe say 48 pixels. And this will just be 48 pixels regardless of which browser I'm using. It'll be 48 pixels. So I can do this. And then we do indeed get a larger text there, right? Another thing I could do is I could say to rem. And what that'll do is that will make it twice the default size, relatively their default size of my font weight, my font size in the web browser, which is 16 pixels. So that should be 32 pixels right there. And there are some people like to scale this down, scale their EM value down, which is what rem is based off of. And we don't need to get into the weeds with this too much today. But they'll prematurely scale this to a different value so that they can say to rem and have that actually be 40 pixels or 60 pixels or whatever, so they can more reasonably think about their pixel sizes. But we're going to use mostly just pixel sizes today, just for simplicity. So we'll say 48 pixels for the H1, which is fairly large. And then for the H2, maybe I want that to be, well, we'll say that should be 32 pixels. And so now we're getting things looking a little bit larger in our web page. It is sort of looking pretty nice. Another thing that maybe I want to do is I don't like the fact that these two, this H1 and this H2 are kind of off to the left side of the page. Maybe I want them to be centered. So I can actually say text align center right here. And what that'll do is, and this only works with text. This won't work for things like divs and whatnot, which you need to use margin and some other properties that we'll take a look at to resolve. But in this case, we have, since we said text align center, what it'll do is it will take whatever this element is and center it relative to its parent. In this case, the H1, its parent is the body because it's not nested inside of anything else. So it's just going to center that within the body of the web page. Now, if I were to say that it should center it within, maybe I want this content on the left side. Maybe I want this CSS test right here to center along the left middle of the page, which would be kind of like a left column of the page, right? excuse me, I can say maybe this div, which I have down here, maybe I want this div to not take up the entire width of the page like we've seen before, right? Which is what a div normally does. It takes up, and we saw this with background color, and we can actually illustrate it one more time. If I choose a better color, for example, let's make the background color, what if we make that the background color and then make the H2 a slightly lighter color? We could do that. This is all kind of done on the fly, so I'm just trying to figure out what would look nice. Let's take the H2, or let's take the div rather. Let's make all of our divs have a background color. And let's make that background color, let's make that background color back to our palette here. Aquamarine I think would look kind of hideous. I kind of like this A6, A6, A8, but it's a little bright, so I'm going to darken it a little bit. So let's say 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, right? It's a number of the beast. And then if I refresh, we do, oh, that still looks pretty hideous, but that's mostly because of the font color. Let's make that font color for the H2 a little brighter. Let's say C6, C6, whoops, C8. See if that's any better. It's a little better. It's not great. We'll work on making a great color in the future. But what I wanted to illustrate, again, was the fact that this background color, or the div, sorry, is taking up the entire width of the page, and therefore the background color. But if I want the div to maybe be only half the width of the page, and instead have the CSS test and whatnot centered, text align centered within that left column, I can specify a width. I can say, for example, width, and then I know, for example, that my browser is probably in 1280 by 720p pixels. I'll say 1280 pixels, but divide by 2 would be 640. So we'll say 640 pixels for my div. And we do indeed see, and it looks like it's centered pretty accurately. Well, maybe not. Let's move this over here. So it's centered pretty approximately, right? And then Bavik Knight saying omen. Linz Potaguar is saying 2B, 2B, 2B. OK, we'll do that. For the background color, I'm guessing, 2B, 2B, 2B. That's a little hard on the eyes. I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of that. We'll say 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, just to be slightly less blasphemous. And that's OK. It's not great. This isn't a great color scheme. We're not investing a lot of resources right now into our design. But now we can see that our div is half the width of the page, not the full width of the page. And that's what you get by using this width property. And we can do the same thing with height. We can say height, for example, 300 pixels. And this won't really, well, I guess it does have different behavior now. So what it'll do is if it's less than, whatever many pixels we said, 300 pixels, it'll actually pad it a bit. It'll add some extra space. And if it's less than that, well, it'll actually be, kind of look as if that element is shorter than the full block of the page. But HTML doesn't break. So even though our tables go beyond the size of that div, it's just going to keep rendering them down the way that it's supposed to, down here below the div. So HTML is fairly generous with the way it renders things. It tries to be as fail-safe as it possibly can. But now if I go to text align center the H2, right, and in this case we're not doing a great job because we have a bunch of H2s here, but we can see that the H2 at the top level of our application, the H2 that was inside of the body, not inside of the div, it's centered throughout the entire width of the page, but the H2 on the left actually centered relative to its div container. So you get relative alignment depending on what the parents are for your child elements. So this is a pretty cool feature. It allows you to accomplish much more flexible layouts this way. But you have to take into consideration what your parents and their children are when doing this. Alex Gabrielov said you could do 3 numbers too, right? Like hash 666 is the same as hash 666666, inspired by our demonstration. Yes, you absolutely can do that. That is correct. FYI, I know there is a color palette for the colorblind. I had to do it for a presentation once, says Adam Fighter 101. A palette for the colorblind. That's an interesting idea. Palette colorblind HTML, or I guess I should have said CSS. Not something I've looked into, to be quite honest. Let me see. There's definitely color palettes that it's saying here to avoid. Green and red, green and brown, blue and purple, green and blue. I mean, I would say virtue of just making your user not cringe, these are probably good to avoid, but I could see that, yeah. The colors that are roughly close in terms of a lot of their components, I think that's probably why it's saying not to do so. How to design for color blindness. Interesting. And this is important, I mean, because even Nick on stream is colorblind. I think, I'm not sure if it was Andy or someone else who was also colorblind. And then Tom Balator, who was here on stream recently, was colorblind. So this is an important thing to definitely consider. Honestly, there's probably a website that'll generate something that looks like this that works well for folks who are colorblind. And I mean, these even look fairly, I mean, this palette to the right here looks pretty nice, all things considered. These two are OK. But this on the left is kind of showing what it looks like to somebody who's not colorblind, and then what it would look like to folks who are colorblind. So yeah, to Adam Fighter's point, I think it was, when you're designing for, I think, as many people as possible to avoid alienating the folks who are colorblind, it's good to take these things into consideration. Now today, I'm probably not doing that. This is probably very hard to read for some folks who are colorblind. Maybe not. Maybe because we're doing light text on a dark background, it's fairly easy to see, but excellent thing to consider. Thank you for bringing that up. Maybell P 2006 says, Palmo, could you try the tables beside each other instead of under each other? Oh, yeah. That's a good point. And I have later on a particular demonstration for how that would work. And this, I have to recall offhand exactly how we do that. I believe we set that to be display inline block. I'm not 100% sure if that's the way to do it. No, that's not how to do it. I might need to get to that in the demonstration before we, because a typical way that you do it is with Flexbox. Flexbox allows you to do columns like that. You could also do float left. So if I did float left, and then I think I have to do clear. What is the clear? None? Is it clear none? I don't remember offhand. If somebody knows offhand how to do it with float, let me know. Otherwise, display flex is generally a way. And also, another thing too, these have to be in a separate container, I think. So I would need to have down here div, and then this would be, and then what I would do is I would probably give this a class that says container, and then I would put both of these inside of that. Something like this. Something like that. And then let me see. Oh, and then I have to go up here and say container, guess display flex. Would that work? Ugh, offhand, how does that work? Okay, let's see. Columns flex. It would be, I apologize. Oh, flex. I think flex direction is the thing that I have to specify. I'm fairly new to Flexbox, so bear with me here. I'll go over all this as soon as I remember all of the syntax. Flex direction row. I think that's what we have to do. Whoops. I don't want to refresh that page. Unless these are the too large. Maybe that's why. Let me see. So in this case, the div would be. So another thing that I wanted to illustrate was that pixel size, setting it to a concrete pixel size is kind of bad practice. What you typically want to do instead, especially if you're doing columns or something like that, is specify a width in percentage. So what I can do is I can say width gets 40% of the parent. And what that does instead, and also, oh, you know what I think it might have also done, is this. This is not good. So what I need to do is set container to be all of this. And then what I also want to do is say, bear with me. Hopefully this will be worth it when we get to it. We say, I'm going to set this class to be column. So we have a container, which is our entire width of our page. And then we have two columns, ideally. So the left side, which has our text, right? So this stuff. And then on the right-hand side will be all of this stuff, so the tables, right? And so I create a container, which is set to display flex, which is flexbox, the way that flexbox works. And we'll get into, we're going to probably backtrack a little bit and cover some more fundamental things before we dive too deep into this. But just to illustrate what two columns looks like, you set the container to be flex, display flex. And then, try float left on the table tags. Yeah, that might be. Oh yeah, time to reduce the width. Yeah, all of these things. There's a bunch of problems with the page right now because we kind of are all over the place with stuff. But you say the container needs to be display flex, with a flex direction of row. The actual column class, and I think this is fine. I actually don't even know if we need anything with the columns, but we'll say that these should get a width of 40% at least. Previously, we had all of our divs getting a width of 40%, which is not what we wanted because our main div, which was going to be our flexbox container, was also getting a width of 40%. That doesn't help anybody. And so, OK, that didn't work because we got rid of our colors. So let me go ahead and set the background color for that again, just so we can visually see where our containers are. What color did we have for that before? I think it was like, was it D? We'll say D, 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 D. No, B, 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 I guess. B, B, B. So we'll use the shorthand I forget who mentioned that. I think it was, shoot, I lost track of where that comment was. I apologize. Whoever suggested, oh, it was Alex Gabrielov. Thank you, Alex, for that suggestion. So we're going to say BBB for that, which is the same as BBB, BBB. Save that. Do that. Oh, did I forget to put that into the, oh, OK. Whoops. I forgot to set the container class on both of the divs. I only set it to one of the divs. Div class is equal to column. Oh, yeah, yeah. I screwed that whole thing up pretty badly. I'm going to go ahead and do this. OK, let's try that, see if that works. OK, cool. So we got it to work. I apologize. So the thing that I did was I had a container. I had the first one outside of my Flexbox container, and it also didn't have a class of container, so everything was just kind of mixed up. But yeah, Alex Gabrielov, yeah, CSS is tricky and often annoying, a little bit. And I'm also a little bit new to Flexbox, and it looks like this is not completely correct the way that I want it. Do I have some float stuff still on here? I don't think so, do I? Display row. Oh, whoops. And I accidentally set that to container. That should be column, not container. There we go. Perfect. So now we have both of our sort of our sets, our divs, but left and left, right? And that's a lot of Davids, yeah. We have 3 Davids just to illustrate. So fantastic. We got everything to work the way we wanted it to work. So I apologize for that. That was a little slightly painful because everything was kind of all over the place. But that is how you would do the modern way of doing columns. And we'd have to go in and look at how you would actually space them out such that they have some spacing between them. They take up the full width of the page, and they're centered. But yeah, no, it looks fantastic at this point. Cool. So that is the introduction to Flexbox. We might have time to actually look a little bit deeper into that and actually go into the documentation and look at all the different flex directions and stuff like that. Because you can do some cool stuff. You can do Flexbox vertically. You can do it horizontally. You can do a whole bunch of cool stuff with vertical alignment. It's pretty robust. But anyway, backtracking a little bit from that, and that was, I forgot who originally asked whether we could do that. I think it was Mabel P 2006. Let's take a step back and look again at some text-related stuff. So I'm going to actually get rid of both of these. Well, rather, I'm just going to get rid of this big table column here. And so we're left with, if we go back here, this. And this is actually fairly painful to look at. This is going to not get a column class. I do this. I'm going to get rid of the container and column classes. And I'm actually going to darken that background, because that background is very hard to see. I'm going to say background color gets 363636. Just like that. Refresh the page. Cool. That looks great. So we're back. We have a centered div element. And we can take a look at some more text-related stuff. So we looked at font size. We looked at text align center, which allows us to text align however we want. We could very easily text align right if we wanted to. So, and also, I'm going to get rid of this UL. It's kind of messing things up a little bit. OK. And this paragraph is not being centered. The reason that the paragraph is not being centered is because we haven't specified that it should. So if I say text align center, that gets centered. Now, we could also do text align right if I do this. And this might come in handy sometimes. And that just moves, and you can't really see it too well because the chat is there kind of blocking it. But there's the text aligned to the right. So it's pretty, just as you would kind of expect it to be. There's a few other things that I want to take a look at. So for example, text decoration. So if you go over to the MDN or W3 Schools, W3 Schools is a good website because they have a lot of really easy documentation just so you can kind of immediately see what you're trying to go for. And they have all the CSS properties here on the left-hand side. So again, w3schools.com. They have HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They have more, actually. They have SQL, PHP, Bootstrap. They have a bunch of different exercises and references and stuff like that. But this is kind of important. And actually, we might even get a chance to see this in practice a little bit later when we build our mock web page, our mock CS50 web page. But they have a couple of different properties that we can use. So for example, if we go back to our main site here, this CS50 on Twitch thing, maybe I want this to be underlined. So what I can do is I can say text over our H1, text decoration, and then underline. And then just like that, we do indeed see that we have a underline beneath our text. So it just gives you a couple of things that you would sort of Microsoft Word style get into your web page. And this can be accomplished using other techniques like border, and we'll see that in the context of border, specifically border bottom. You would use that to make a more dynamic lower bar underline. For example, if you want some padding, if we look at CS50's web page, for example, if I highlight this, this looks like it actually does use just the regular underline feature. But maybe I want that underline to be farther down below the text. I could specify something called border bottom. And we'll get to border actually pretty soon. Once we finish covering letter and text properties, we'll take a look at that. But there's some other ones, for example, line through. So if I go over here and I say line through, just like that, you might envision a to-do list application where when you click on something, when you click a checkbox next to some text that specifies a to-do entry in your to-do list, that'll add a CSS property on the text for that to-do list that says set the text decoration to a line through, right? And this allows you, it's a pretty easy way to visually see that you've checked off a task, right? Underline, overline, we'll take a look at that. So that's just two properties together. So we can say overline like that, and we'll go back to here. And what that does, it's literally just the opposite of underline, but I can say, just like they demonstrated, underline or overline, underline, and then it'll do both, right? So you can get some kind of interesting styling that way. You can mix and match in a lot of scenarios all of the properties together just by separating them with the space. And this is a common thing we'll see with things like border, where you can specify. Actually, we looked at this with border already. We saw in the table, we don't have it anymore. But if I say, for example, table border gets 10 pixels solid green, and I go back to my page, and we don't have it anymore. I forgot. I didn't put that in there. But instead, if I say, maybe this will be for a div, and we'll say border 10 pixels solid blue. So now our div has a border that's 10 pixels big, it's solid, and it's blue, right? This would be this sort of is multiple properties all put together. And actually, in the context of border, it's multiple separate specific CSS properties that they have a shorthand syntax for. But this is a nice way to get all of that on the same line just by separating them with the space. So you can't do, for example, I think 10 pixels. Actually, I think you can, and it'll just give you default values. So I could do this. But it doesn't have a color, and it doesn't have a style, so you actually don't see anything. 10 pixels blue, though. Can I do that? No, you can't. It has to go in a specific order. So it needs to be 10 pixels, and then the style, and then blue. Otherwise, it won't work. It'll just throw an error. Bavignite says font family. Oh, that's a good thing to bring up, actually. Font family. And I wanted to show that in the context of Google Fonts, because so what you can do is you can say, for example, for my H1, let's say I don't like the default font, which I think is like Times New Roman or something Arial. I don't think it's Arial. But let's say I wanted it to be Arial. I can say font family Arial. Go back to here, go back to my page, refresh, and then notice that now we get a slightly better looking font. It's kind of a, not really Bootstrap. I don't think Bootstrap uses Arial. Maybe it uses Arial. It looks similar to Bootstrap, but it looks a lot better just by virtue of that. And actually, this is a great opportunity to showcase the universal selector. So the universal selector is a selector that actually lets you select everything in your web page, which can be good if you know that you want the same font for everything. In this case, maybe I want the same font for everything. So I'll say font family Arial and the universal selector. And this will, and star is in computer science and in programming a lot of the times just means everything, right? And you can use it to pattern match. You can say everything dot whatever dot srt or dot txt, and that just means get every single file with that file extension. Everything .txt, everything .js, everything .css. This asterisk symbol is just a universal or a glob character. So I'll go back here, and if I refresh, notice that now all of the text looks different. It doesn't have that default Times New Roman kind of not very good look to it, kind of old school. Now it looks somewhat OK, but if we want our own custom font, you know, we only have a certain number of limited fonts that we can use font family with. And different computers actually have different fonts. And I think, for example, I'm on a Mac, so I think I can use Helvetica. Maybe not. Maybe I can't use Helvetica. But there are certain fonts that certain web browsers on certain machines can and cannot use. If you want to ensure that you can get access to the same font, in this case, I actually kind of like this PT Sans font. So I'm on fonts.google.com, which is a really cool resource you can use to get fonts that you can download to your web page using a link tag, and we'll actually use that with our CSS here in just a second. But if I go to fonts.google.com, choose a font that I like. Maybe I like this PT Sans one. And you can choose the font weight and all kinds of other stuff. I'm going to just hit this plus, and then I'm going to come down here. And what I can do is I get this embed tag, right here. As soon as I've decided however many font families, font family just kind of means it's a word that represents the font style, but also the weight and some other stuff. And I can choose, I basically get this link tag I can embed in my web page courtesy of Google's font service. So if I go back to my page and I go over here to the head and I paste in that link tag, notice that now I get this PT Sans font link that I'm downloading. This is what this link tag does, is it basically downloads whatever this URL is in this href attribute, and it includes it in your web page so that somebody from, when they actually get your web page, when they query your server or whatever, they actually get this downloaded to their machine locally along with all your other stuff. And we can use this with CSS pages too, which we'll look at in a second. And we also have to tell it that it's a rel, I forget the exact shorthand of that, I think it's relationship But it's a style sheet. It's a relation or relevance. It's a style sheet. Even though it's not a CSS style sheet, it's technically interpreted as a style sheet so that we can include the Tricomic Sans MS, says Charles. I love it. Yeah, that would be great. But it'll include this into our document for us. So then we can then say font family PT Sans right here, which I think, oh, and we need to put this in quotes. Because if you don't do that, it's going to interpret that as two separate words, two separate characters, or two separate fonts. And that should just work right off the bat. So if I go over back to our stream here and I refresh, notice that we do indeed have a different font. We have that PT Sans font that we got from Google. And no matter which machine you're using, if you're on a Windows machine or a Linux machine or an Android phone, you're going to see this font in your web browser, which is really nice. And it's a decent looking font. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of the overline, underline, so I'm going to take that off for now. And then that's that. We have, thank you very much for the follow. And actually, a few people followed, and I apologize I did not read them off. BenJ18, PSD 4781, Barris GLTN, Jerichoholic 619, Syphislin, and We'll Have, thank you very much. We have, thank you very much for the follow. Appreciate it. Cool. So now we have the ability to get different fonts, and we're not tied to a specific operating system. We don't have to worry about a specific operating system when we're implementing our web page. APS Knight asks, when is the next code review stream? Next Tuesday. It'll be on this, on the Twitch sort of events thing that we recently added below the stream, below the video. And it'll also be on Facebook and YouTube and Reddit and Twitter. We'll post it to everything. So next Tuesday at, I believe it's at 2, but we'll post a specific date shortly. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that code review stream. So we'll do more of those. Often people do margin 0, padding 0, CSS reset. Oh, right, for the universal selector? Yeah, they do. Margin 0 and padding 0. Because by default, HTML puts a little bit of margin and padding on everything when you first start, or at least on the parent element, the body. So it's good to just kind of take that off. So if we do that, notice that we do indeed get everything kind of set to a 0. Everything is just kind of scrunched together, and we'll look at padding and margin here in a little bit, what's called the CSS box model. But it's an important thing to definitely be aware of. What is the difference between universal and body selector? Doesn't the body selector select everything, says Knight Rider 69? Actually, that's a good question. Let's look that up. Difference between body and universal selector. The body selector has higher priority, but the star selector applies more broadly. So in the context of body foo bar, with where there's a foo immediately within the body and then a p tag, the body selector will determine the background of the text foo, but the star selector will determine the background of the p element. OK, so it has more priority, I guess. So star nests down to everything, whereas the body tag will not have the same level of priority. So if you override anything within a subtag, it'll apply to that subtag, but star tag will override everything. It's hard to right now contrive an example that illustrates this, and I think either way you probably will be better off, but I think you'll get a sense of which is better or more useful depending on what you write. OK. The HTML selector and letting all elements inherit that value. I mean, I think for a lot of use cases, they'll be roughly the same. Star is just kind of easier and applies a little bit. Like I said, it nests more broadly than the other ones do. So I can envision some subtle differences between them. But if you know that you're going to want everything, regardless of its nesting level, to be a certain font family, I would say probably use star. Can you show us the mouse over feature where it gets bold, underlined, etc.? Yeah, we can definitely take a look at that. UTDo988, thank you much for the follow. So that's the hover pseudo class. Now, before we get to that, let's do a couple of things. I don't like the fact that all of my CSS is kind of all in my HTML tag or HTML body, and it's, well, rather my HTML head. I don't like that it's in my HTML file, and it's kind of getting a little cluttered. I want to take this all out and maybe just kind of reference my styles for being elsewhere, which I can actually do here. If I say link href equals, and then if I say styles.css, rel is equal to style sheet, and then I go over here into my styles.css, which I've already pre-created, and I save that, go back here, refresh the page. Everything is completely the same. But the only difference now is that, whoops, I'm all over the place here. OK. What did I do? What did I just do? Oh, that's what I did. Accidentally hit Command V and pasted and got all messed up. Now we basically said that we are relegating all of our CSS to a separate file. This link thing, not only does it apply to resources on the internet, but also resources on your own file system. In this case, styles.css, relative to where this index.html page is. And styles.css is the convention that CS50 uses for style sheets. But you could call this anything that you wanted to, as long as it's a CSS file, and you say that its relevance or relation is a style sheet. And then now, I don't have to edit all of my CSS in my HTML page anymore. I can just edit it directly in my styles.css page, right? So we've solved that problem. A couple of people have requested how to get the underline feature working on hover, right? When we put a mouse over something. That's pretty easy to do. Let's say I want it to be on this h1. So what I can do is I can say h1:hover. And this is what's called a pseudo-class. It's not a technical class in the same way that, for example, .hover would be, where you can just apply it to an element. It is kind of conditional. It applies only when something is true or false, right? Whether we're hovering over something or not. And so what I can say is, basically, when I hover over an h1, so I'm saying h1:hover, I say, what was it, font or text decoration, underline. If I go back to my page, refresh, and then I hover over that that element, and it's actually taking over the entire width of this this page because it spans the entire width, then I do get a hover. I do get that text underline being true, which is interesting because it actually because it's a block level element. All h1s are block level. All h tags in general are block level. It means they take up the entire width of the page. Even if I'm over here, I'm still getting the that hovering behavior when I don't really necessarily want that behavior. So there's a couple ways you could solve that. You could turn that into a span, for example. So if I said span, and this should work, and then I set the span, and let's say class is equal to title. And if I go over here, and then I say, I'm also going to get, I have two separate div tags here. That's not good. You typically want only one selector. You don't want to put two of the same selector in different places. It's not, that's not good practice. And actually, because body is higher level, I'm actually going to bring that up top, up here. And actually, yeah, we'll do that. And we'll say below h1 hover. It's no longer h1 hover. And actually, h1 is no longer what we have. We actually have a span. So I'm actually going to call this title. I'm going to bring the class over down to the bottom. I'm going to kind of have all of my tag selectors and my ID selectors and my class selectors kind of separated. And this is kind of stylistic. It's not something that I think you're mandatorily obligated to do. But I'm going to say, I'm going to put my class at the bottom because it's separate. It's a separate kind of selector than IDs and tags. And then I'm going to say the title should get all that stuff. And text-align center. Now this should work. No, maybe not, actually. Text-align center. Oh, is it because it's not in a div that's block level? Oh, that might be the case. Let's try that. No, that doesn't work, and that actually gave us our. So text align doesn't apply to spans, which is interesting. OK. So I mean, there's one way we would do this is we would say margin auto. So if I were to say, if I were to get rid of that div, and then say margin auto, this should have the same effect. Oh, I guess not. OK. I'm just having a rough. OK, let's see. Center span text. Oh, center it on the container. OK. So if I were to say div class equals text container. Sorry, you can tell that I'm still very much learning this as well. Text align then goes on the container. If this doesn't work, then yeah, there we go. Cool. Now, OK, so we don't have the hover attribute anymore. So what I can do is I can say dot title hover text decoration underline. And now we get the behavior that we wanted earlier, but it's not applying it to the entire div, right? It's not underlining it when I'm over here, because a span is an inline element. It's not a block element. So we have the behavior that we wanted before. Notice that now I can hover over this just on the element itself, and we're getting it underlined appropriately. So thanks for sticking with me. Apologize for that. That was a little bit messy. Which CSS framework do you like most among Bootstrap Foundation and Bulma CSS, or do you have any other preferences? I haven't used Foundation a lot. I looked at it briefly. I know Semantic UI is gaining traction right now, but Bootstrap is probably the one that I have the most experience with. So I would say that's the one I like the most, but it's not the one that I've myself really I haven't really dug into a lot of the internal details amongst many of them to give you an encompassing picture, so I can't really speak. Can I apply a custom behavior that applies to more than one element when something is triggered? For example, change the colors from all the H1 elements when something is hovered. For that, you would probably need JavaScript, because then you're injecting a property onto a bunch of elements at large. I don't think you can do it in raw CSS. I think you would literally need to something like jQuery or JavaScript, where you say when I hover over any, basically you apply a selector that says you would assign that selector to a variable for all of your whatever, your A1 or your spans or whatever, or your particular class of text. And then you would basically say, for every one that we also selected, change their property to underline. And then you would do the same thing for when you got off of it. You would need to say, when I'm not hovered over it, ununderlined it. We can maybe do something like that when we do the jQuery or the JavaScript stream. But yeah, that's something that I think you would have to do in, I think you would have to do that in JavaScript. If somebody knows of a way to do that in vanilla CSS, let me know. Indra Reddy says we could use the align attribute, just regular align. Align content. That's for flex, it looks like. Yeah, this is for full. Is this, maybe it's not for just for flex? It looks like it's just for flex. That's align content. I'm not sure about regular align. But text align applies to the children of an element. So in this case, we had to use it on text container. We couldn't use it on the span itself, which makes sense because I guess if it's looking at all of its children, I could see that making sense. I think it applies to the H1 because the H1 is technically a container that has text inside of it, and it spans the entire width of the page. And then because it internally has a text field or a block of text, it therefore can align that text because it's immediately a child. It's like a hidden child kind of. That's my guess on how it works. again, it's a little bit of kind of tinkering and figuring things out. But yeah, that was an example of a hover pseudo-class. So pseudo-classes are pretty cool. It allows you to use this colon operator, and you kind of specify a condition. You can do this for a few different things. So there's, for example, A tags. So if I were to say, let's just say that instead of this being a, what is it? Instead of this being a span, let's say this is an A tag. So it's an anchor tag. And then I can say href equals twitch.tv/cs50tv, just like that. Class is still title, so we still get the styling stuff that we saw before. And if I go over here, notice that now it should still do the underline stuff, right? Except now it'll be a link, right? And actually, the thing about links is, oh, what did I just screw up? What did I do? Title hover, wait. What did I just do? Why is everything now underlined? Oh, wait. I forgot to set this to an A. Sorry, rookie mistake. Don't do that. Forgot the closing A tag. But notice that by default, the A tag already has an underline text decoration. So that's one of the things that kind of convolutes our current bit of code. But let's just say I want to change this so that when it's visited, maybe if I've already visited this website, and I know that I have because I've been to, oh, sorry, also, by the way, HTTP, make sure you specify HTTPS. If you say just twitch.tv/something, it's considered a local file. It uses the file protocol, so it'll get confused. It won't actually go to Twitch. It'll go to, it'll try to look for a file on my hard drive called twitch.tv/cs50tv, which definitely does not exist. But if I want to, let's say, click on this, which it won't work, and if I go back, refresh, and then click on it, we do get taken to our Twitch page, right? So it's an anchor tag. It works like expected. But maybe if I've already visited it, I want it to look a different shade, a different color. So I can say, and I believe it's visited, just like that. And then I'll say text decoration. Text decoration underline is kind of redundant at this point because it's already going to be underlined. I could say, what I could do is I could say a text decoration none, right? And that will get rid of the text underline for me. If they say text decoration none when it already has the underline on there, anchor tags will no longer have that, right? Which is kind of nice. So now I actually can say text decoration underline if I want it to only show it when I visited the site already. Actually, but I'm not going to do that. I'm actually just going to say title on hover because I like the fact that it shows the underline on hover, and this is similar to the CS50 page, right? So I can say text decoration underline, and then when I visited it, maybe I want the color to be, I don't know, maybe something like. And what's cool is it'll actually show me the colors that I've used in my current page already. Or here in this drop-down menu. This is another cool thing about VS Code that I really like, is it has this context, this like programming, this project context that shows you what all the different colors are that you've messed with. So let's say I want this to be maybe like a blue color-ish, I guess. Yeah, something like that. So we'll say 12, 36, and then 98. Which is probably OK. So if I refresh this, because I visited it already, it's kind of got this blue color. Now it's a little hard to see, granted. So I'll make it a little bit brighter. Let's say 36, 78, EF. Refresh. Now it's a little bit easier to see. And if I hover over it, I get that underline. But that shows me that I visited it. Now if I set that to maybe some other website, and actually I don't know which website offhand I could. I don't think I've visited yahoo.com on here. So if I say, for example, yahoo.com, if I refresh this, it does indeed get to be the white color. If I click on it, it'll take me to Yahoo. If I go back, refresh, now it's blue again. So you can change things contextually based on whether you visited them or not. And this is another pseudo class. If you're curious about all the different pseudo classes, there's a lot. pseudo-classes CSS. There's a few different ways you could look at it. You could go to w3schools.com, which will give you a sort of a tutorial on how to use them. So first child, which is cool. Maybe you only want the first thing in a list or first thing in a div to be a certain color or a certain display. Maybe when you hover over a div and maybe you want its p tags to be a specific color. So this is a cool thing. It's actually saying on the div hover, make all the p's display block, which is interesting. Let's see what that actually looks like. So that's cool. So display none is by default. But if I hover over that div, the display ends up turning into block. And so display is another tag we can maybe take a look at. So display basically lets you hide stuff. So display block, display none, display inline. So if display block means it'll kind of go on the next line, line by line. Display inline means that it'll be all rendered in a, horizontally, which is cool. We can actually do some cool stuff this way with lists to make nav bars, horizontal nav bars. Will you have BS4 lessons, which I think is Beautiful Soup, if I'm not mistaken, Trying to Fool You, and also Trying to Fool You, thank you for the follow. UTDO988 and Brewis, if I missed your names as well, thank you very much. Align is center. I have to take a look at that injure ready. It's time for the Colton bolt-on. Interesting. GD984. You can definitely, one way is some element hover h1, which translates to when I hover over some element, let's apply the style to the h1. I think that's a reference to, I think that's just the nested value, isn't it? Which is exactly this demonstration. It's not applying it to all things. It's just applying it to whatever is a child of that element. Lynn says, this is a long stream. Yeah, mine tend to be a little bit longer, around the 3-hour mark as opposed to the 1.5, just so we try and get through a little bit more stuff. I mean, arguably, we're going a bit slow today. We're not covering a tremendous amount of stuff. This is just CSS basics. So I have a lot of stuff here. So we'll probably end up doing a like a CSS part 2, where we cover a little bit more meaty stuff and maybe go over some animation and other stuff. But yeah, this is a bit of a long one. Display grid and display flex are the most useful ones. Oh yeah, display flex is really good. Like we saw earlier for getting the actual, when we got the, the 2 columns rendering. That was very important. And then Brewis is asking, can you copy this link to the chat, please? I actually don't have the chat here on this machine because I'm not logged into Twitch on my MacBook. But if you go to w3schools.com, and then go to, you can either type in w3schools.com or type in w3schools.com/CSS and then go over to this pseudo-class section on the left, which will be where all of the different CSS things are. You can not only get access to what pseudo-classes are, but you can also look at a bunch of other properties. So there's a ton of them, and hence why we can't necessarily do a one stream to cover all this stuff, because we could easily go for hours and hours and hours on just a subset of these things. But definitely check out w3schools.com. Definitely check out MDN as well, which is the Mozilla Developer Network, developer.mozilla.org. You can type in pseudo-classes here, or pseudo-class, and then click this link, and then we get some information on pseudo-classes, pseudo-class documentation. And then you can see here, for example, it has an example, which is what we did earlier, which is the hover pseudo-class, which is pretty nice. So it takes in the form of selector, pseudo-class. And then here is actually what I wanted to show, which is all of the potential pseudo-classes that you can use in your code. So active, any link, blank, checked, host, hover, which we looked at, left. There's quite a few. Optional, only child. There's nth child, nth of type. So if you wanted to choose every other p tag or every third p tag, for example. A lot of different examples. I encourage you to mess with these, and I haven't myself even used the majority of these, or even maybe half of these. But I have used nth of type, nth child, left, active, visited we just looked at, has, focus, first of type. There's a lot of really great ones, so definitely check that out. Some of the tallest hair I've seen in a while. I'm kind of impressed. That's Hippo 00100. I've been telling everybody in the chat I was going to get a haircut for like 3 weeks now, so it's a little embarrassing at this point. I guess we can write hover in JS2, says PSD 4781. Is there any difference? What is the best way to write it? Hover in JS will afford you more flexibility. So to everyone's point earlier, or to whomever suggested it, their point earlier, if we wanted to, for example, if we hovered over this particular tag and we wanted all of the tags in our page to have this highlight, we could, it wouldn't be very easy to do this in raw CSS, and I don't actually think it's possible. But in JavaScript, you can do anything. And so I could say, if I only got one hover, if I hovered over one particular H1 or H2 or whatnot in my page, in JavaScript, I could just get every single tag in the page, in the DOM, and apply a style to it when I do that hover operation. In CSS, you don't really get that functionality. It kind of just applies on an element by element basis, or at least on all the children of that element, not specifically on all of the elements in the page. You could, if it were a div, perhaps you could get that same kind of behavior, similar behavior, but you'd have to kind of hover over the div at large and then apply it to all of the p children. But as I says, you said we could make fun of you if you didn't get a haircut, but we're being nice. No, I encourage you to make fun of me. I welcome it. NVIDIA kindly plugged the W3 Schools link for the pseudo-classes there. How do you auto-format code in VS Code, says Knitman118. Interesting. I don't think I auto-format my code at all, so I'm not sure. But let's say autocode VS Code. Let me see how to do that. Code formatting is available in VS Code through the following shortcuts. On Mac, Shift Option F. So if I do Shift Option F, oh, nice. That's pretty cool. So TIL. I didn't actually know that you could do that. So Shift Option F if you're on Mac. If you're on Windows, Shift Alt F, which will allow you to do that. Colton's hair is special, defies Earth's gravitational force, says Babbitt Knight. Kind of does. But yeah, so Shift Option F, which is actually kind of nice. I might actually start using that sometimes. So thank you for that kind plug. I still think you should leave your hair, but more color and taller. And yes, I'm being serious. Shave the sides, though. I do need to shave the sides. GDE 1984, I don't know if I want to get it any taller, to be honest. It's way too tall already. It needs to get shortened. GDE 1954, if it's like that without spray or gel, I'm extra jealous. No, there's definitely spray and gel involved. OK, cool. So let's actually, with the limited time we have left, maybe work on making a simple web page. And what I wanted to do is make something in the style of CS50's web page, which is here. So this is cool because we have a sort of left-hand nav bar over here. And then we also have a right-hand body of content, which is here. And it scrolls, and they kind of scroll independently. And we haven't really looked at that too much. And I don't know offhand if we'll do scrolling on the left-hand side, but we can certainly get a nav bar that scrolls on the left-hand side and maybe approach a more complicated example in a future follow-up stream. But what we're doing here, essentially, is actually something pretty cool. Let me go ahead. I might actually not be able to show what's going on necessarily, but we have a nav bar and we have content. And the thing that I want to, I think, before we really go into what we're dealing with here, before we go too deep in the details of how this website works, is we need to cover one big last important thing, and that's the box model, the CSS box model. And that is the fact that every element in the page has these things called margin and padding, and also a border. And these things influence where things are separated, right? And if you go into the Chrome Developer Tools, which, by the way, if you're on a Mac, is Alt-Command-I, or I believe it's Shift-Control-I on a Windows machine, you can go to the Developer Tools, and you can see every individual element of your web page. I'm going to go ahead and bring this down. So we can see that here in our web page, we have a few different things. We have our head, which is invisible. We have our body, which is all of that stuff. Notice that when we hover over it, it shows everything. It shows it in blue. We have this thing called an aside, right, which is kind of nicely named. It's the sidebar of our web page. And then we have this main thing, which is our sort of our content. And it's hovering over everything as well. It's hovering over, it's still showing everything as a different color. Now we have this on our left side of our page, everything's kind of an orange color for some reason. And then on the right side, we have this green color, and then we have blue color. And this is because there are different ways of spacing elements. There's our content itself, which is the blue. This is the stuff that we care about. There's green, which I believe is padding. Let me confirm that. This is the one downside to showing everything in 720p. Everything gets a little bit dense. Oh, and I realized you can actually see that too well because of the chat. So let me go ahead and just bring that right over here for a second. OK, chat's on the right side for just a brief moment. So here we have this box model right here. Right? This is important. This is very important in CSS. This is how you end up spacing things apart in a very robust way. For example, making things vertically spaced or making things kind of inside of a box of content rather than right at the edges, which can look a little ugly. If we look back at the page, we can see that we have our blue content, and this is assuming that we're looking at our main body of content, not the aside. Remember, the aside tag in this case, and this is a semantic tag. This is a cool thing. There's a main tag and an aside tag. These two tags are HTML, but they're more semantically meaningful than, for example, nav or p or h1. They kind of tell us what the content is in our page. For example, aside is clearly content that's off to the side of our main bit of content, and main is our main content, right? It's more meaningful at a glance. We can read it immediately. And so when we hover over an element using the Chrome developer tools, we can see exactly where we've put padding and margin and where our main body of content is. And we can illustrate the difference here too. In this case, we have margin. So margin is pretty cool. Margin is essentially our way of putting things kind of spacing outside of our content, right? We want to maybe move things off to the left or right, which is what we're doing here with our sidebar. And then padding goes between the margin and our border, right? And so that's kind of important. And let's illustrate that maybe with a simple example. Let me move the chat back a little bit. For more cross-browser compatibility, use your box sizing so the browser is not guessing. I'd have to take a look at that. I'm not entirely sure what you mean offhand. Let's see, CSS box sizing. Including padding and border in the element's total width and height, which makes sense. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's a different way, I think, of looking at the problem. Oh, I see. Yeah, it can be important when you have, for example, two div columns that are side by side, and the inner content, for example, in our web page that we were just looking at, we could say that this is 50% of the width of the page, and it also has some padding or whatnot. And that gets applied internally to this. I mean, I think that would be the, well, yeah, the content would not be the 50%. It would be the padding and the content are 50%. So yeah, it's a little bit more of a robust way of solving the problem. I agree. We won't take too much of a look at that now, but yeah, that's a good idea. And to Adamantine Bipartite's comment there, CS50 web page actually was taken from a template called hide, which is built on pool. And I'm not entirely sure what some of these things mean. Pool is, let's take a look at what pool is. So it looks like a plugin for Jekyll, I think, which is what we use to generate our static HTML for our CS50 web page. But hide is the theme. And hide just means this. Basically, the paradigm is this big sidebar and then this big block of content here. And Jekyll's cool because it allows us to write our pages in Markdown, and then it gets transpiled over to HTML via Jekyll. Yeah, it's free to use. As far as I'm aware. I'm pretty sure this wasn't this is a free. Yeah, I want to be 100% sure. I definitely pulled it from a list of free Jekyll themes today. But yeah, it has the MIT license, so yeah, you can use it no matter what. So, completely free to use. We use it for our web page. It's an awesome theme. I'm a big fan of it. And here was the web page that I grabbed it off of, jekyllthemes.io. And so if you're going to use Jekyll, which is used a lot on GitHub, and you can use it easily with, for example, GitHub, what is it, github.io? GitHub Pages. There's a bunch of themes like that. There's this landing page theme, which is pretty cool. Leap Day is pretty cool. Has like this kind of like photographic type theme. Masonry is pretty cool. We actually used Masonry for the staff page that I actually helped write that page with all of the staff GIFs, and they all kind of automatically move around. That used the Masonry JS library, but this is a Jekyll theme that uses Masonry for all of its content. So it's pretty cool, pretty robust. Here's a 3-column design. Yeah, if you want a nice way to set up a blog or something, or some web page, be it on GitHub Pages or some other site, you can totally do that by going to jekyllthemes.io. You could use Hide, or you could use something else. CS50 likes Hide, and I'm a big fan of it as well. So we'll kind of make as far as we can get within the next 20-30 minutes, we'll make a simple version of this and sort of conclude our intro to CS stream, and we'll do more CS streams in the future and build some more websites. Hopefully some people learned some things in today's stream. But yeah, let's go ahead and, oh, one thing I did want to clarify before we dive too deep into that is talking about the box model a little bit more in detail. And so the way I can illustrate this is if I create a div, and let's say the div is going to be text container, right? So let's go ahead and clear all of this just for simplicity. Go back to my page, refresh it. Pretty easy. Let's go ahead and we'll say that the H2, no, not the H2. We'll say that the div text container is going to be, rather, we're going to create another div called inner container. Whoops. And we're going to set the width of that container to 50%. So it's going to be 50% of the parent container. The text container itself is going to be 50% of the browser. And then the text container, it's going to have a background color of red. And the inner container is going to have a background color of yellow. And there is no content in the inner container. So the height needs to be, let's say the height is going to be 100 pixels. And let's say that the height is going to be 100 pixels for the text container as well. So now we have two containers here. We have a inner container, which is 50% and it's yellow. So it's taking up 50%. So this red container here is this big container that's taking up this full width, this full size. And the yellow div is inside that div and takes up only 50% of it. Now, if I want, I could say maybe I want the text container to have a margin of, let's say, 10 pixels. And what that does, you might have seen it. It moved a little bit inwards. I'm going to make it a little bit more exaggerated. I'm going to say 50 pixels. So notice that the margin, it kind of moved it down a little bit from the top left inwards. And do we have that CS50 on Twitch inside of it? We do. OK, that's OK. Let's get rid of that. So now we can see that we have sort of this padding around our entire div, right? It's kind of going, sort of adding white space around it, which is kind of cool. Remote is saying hello. Hello, Remote. Good to see you. Love the review. Nice to think without having to grind out code. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree. The review is nice. So we've basically said here, margin, we should have a margin of our text container, which is 50 pixels. And it's 50 pixels on all sides. Maybe I want this to be a little bit different, though. Maybe I want to only be 50 pixels on the bottom, because maybe I want to pad stuff out. So I can just say margin bottom 50 pixels, just like that. And now notice that it's still relative to the top left, and then HTML does add a little bit of margin for us by default on the top left, which we can override by star selector, margin 0, padding 0. Just to better illustrate this. So now notice that we're right at the top left corner. We have a little bit of padding on the bottom, but not the left or the top, right? So that's a little bit different. We had a couple, we only have one fine-tuned bit of margin. But I can also say margin left, and maybe I want that to be 30 pixels. So then it moves it over 30 pixels just from the left. So now we don't have a uniform margin. We have a margin that's changed relative to the bottom and relative to the left. And if I say margin top 100 pixels, that's even more exaggerated, and that's moved us down a little bit. Now, if I add a border to the text container, for example, 10 pixels solid green, which is going to look slightly hideous, we see that the margin is actually outside of the border. But what if I want that div to kind of be, maybe I want there to be a little bit of spacing between the div and the border and the outside, right? Maybe the yellow and the green boxes should have some spacing outside of them, and then the green border, and then the white space. We do that with padding. So if I say 10 pixels of padding, notice that that actually padded our div a little bit, but it also it had the effect of filling our, it actually filled our, because it's the div at large, it ended up filling that padding with red. And we can get around that by adding another div. If I say, how do we do this? If I say div class is equal to, if I say maybe this should be content, and then we say class is going to be equal to red rect and yellow rect. So changing our classes here a little bit just to visually better represent the white space because it was filling the red based on how we had the div set up. I'm going to change this to be content. Get rid of the background color. That's going to be red. Did I call it red div? Red rect. And I'm going to set that width to be, it'll be 100%. In that case, though, we need that to be, no, actually, that should be fine. That should be fine. I think this altogether should be pretty good. And then that'll just be 50% of its parent. And then same thing for yellow rect. Yellow rect will be, rather, we'll just rename this to yellow rect. So something similar to that. And actually, that's not quite illustrating what I wanted it to illustrate because the content is taking up 50% of its parent. So, and then that's not working out. So let me figure out what's going on here. So the content should be 50% of the body. So width should be 50% of that, which is great. And then this bit here needs to be the full width, I think. Red rect with height. How do I have this set up? Oh, red rect, and then, oh, maybe that's why. And then we'll do that. We'll try that. We'll see if that works. That might work. Oh, that's taking up, oh, OK, wait. That is not working because they are, is it displaying the yellow rect right on top of that one? Wait, why is it doing that? Oh, because we haven't specified a height. There we go. And then it's not displaying them inline, so they have to be display inline. So I can say, you know, that's OK. There's a lot of bits and pieces. That's no longer, but the point is, before we spend too long trying to debug that, now we have a, and I'm just going to get rid of the yellow rect, actually. We'll do that. So now we have a red rect inside of the, and if we wanted them to be, earlier we had them filling the rect and then displaying one after the other. That was having the inner yellow one being 50% of the red one, which was a direct parent of the full width of the, that was the problem. It was that red rect wasn't 100%. Red rect needed to be 100%. And then yellow rect is 50%. And then therefore, we can then embed div class equals yellow rect like that, just like that. And that should fix it. Perfect. So that is the example that we had before. So now we can see that between the rectangles, the colored rectangles, and the border, we have a little bit of padding. This is the difference between padding and margin. Margin goes outside the border. Padding goes inside the border, which allows you to do some interesting things with the way you have your content laid out, so that you can have your everything nicely displayed. Oh yeah, and then display inline block. That would work too. If we wanted them to be sequential, like this. I do need to make sure that this is 50% now. But then I can say display inline block. I believe it goes right there. Oh no, I think it needs, maybe it needs to be this, display inline block. Yeah, not sure. I don't remember offhand. I have to mess with it. But the point is that we have padding versus margin, right? And those are two big different things. And we can see that in Chrome Developer Tools. If we go back over to the CS50 page and we choose this thing, we can hover over things. We can see that our aside, or rather, if we're hovering over our content, which we're doing here, which is our main tag, and then we have the main body sort of focused, it's actually, because now we know that orange is margin, green is padding, we can see that it's actually just shifted over from our aside, our menu. And the two are actually laid right on top of each other. And this is a display relative attribute. And Charles is saying, I guess it's easier with Flex. Yeah, it's much easier with Flex. Doing block aligning stuff is kind of a nightmare. I'm a big fan of Flexbox as opposed to display inline and inline block and whatnot. And I offhand forget what order and which elements need to have that attribute. I don't remember if maybe it needs to be just inline, if it's display inline for these things. And I also don't know if it's because they're both 50% and maybe they need to be 49%. I'm going to just refresh it just as a sanity check. OK, that's they're not even displaying at this point. OK, I'm not sure. Display inline block. Here, we'll Google this. CSS display divs same line. Did we not just do display inline block? Is that, am I going crazy? Is it because they're both 50% and maybe they need to be 49%? Yeah, that's what it was. The 50% was screwing it up. If they both add up to 100%, it won't actually let it render. So that was the problem. It's getting more than 100% when you add the margins, right? Not the margins, actually, the padding. And that's a good point. And that, I think, is what the person prior in stream recommended with the, what attribute was that? What was that? That was an excellent point that they brought up. Shoot, where was that? I apologize, I forgot. Oh, border box, yes. Box sizing border box. That'll apply the padding to the 50% that we saw on the, like it basically won't add the padding to the full width of those elements such that they end up needing to go down to the next line. It'll actually consider it a different, it'll include that as part of that 50% calculation, so we don't have to worry about that. Yeah, total size. Yeah, padding. Padding was what was causing the issue. All right. So this is a good time for us to think about how we could easily implement our own version of the CS50 page, the sort of hide-inspired page. And what I want to do is I want to, and actually we'll make this a nav, I think. Class is going to be equal to sidebar. Right? And let's say I want an H1 in here, or sorry, not an H1, a UL in here, or rather, it's going to be an OL, because I don't want there to be any numbers or anything at the moment. And then we'll say this should be our content. We'll say class is equal to content. And just as a sanity check, I'm going to go ahead and Walsh9, thank you very much for the follow. Also, if I missed anybody's follows, I apologize. Walsh9, De Quicksilva, Fox8, and Trying to Fool You. Thank you all very much for the follows. OK, so we can get rid of all this except for the star selector. I'm not going to use the star selector. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the nav, sidebar class. Try to avoid using the like HTML tag selectors as much as I can to make sure I keep it to the classes. We'll use sidebar and then content. And those will be two classes that we're going to specify some stuff about, right? So sidebar is going to be, we'll say background color. We'll say background color. We want to use a theme again, right? So let's actually, we'll go back and we'll choose a palette. Thank you to John BC for the follow. Much appreciated. Let's choose a new random palette. OK, I kind of, well, this one doesn't have a great body. Let me see. I guess we could just use white. Oh, this is a nice little, sort of like a, what is it called? Pastel. For some reason, couldn't think of the right word. I guess we'll just use white, and then maybe maybe have. No, I don't like that color. Sure, we'll use this 2F394D. 2F394D. So we'll say 2F394D is going to be our sidebar content, and then our main content is just going to have a background color of white for now. And then we'll say height should be 100%, right? Because we want to span the entire vertical height of our web page. Width should be, maybe we'll say 40%. And that's that, right? OK, so we'll do that. We'll render this. We'll see how it looks. And it is not rendering anything. Sidebar. Class is equal to sidebar. Did I screw something up here? Does it need to go within a div, maybe? That's strange. We'll do a full page, or rather, here's what we'll do. We'll say this is going to be the container class. This nav and div are going to go inside of this. This might have something to do with navs being a little bit funky. That is interesting. OK, so we do indeed have a nav, right? Am I not tripping? Did I screw something up here? Nav class is equal to sidebar. OK. Oh, is it because it has no? Oh, maybe because the OL doesn't have anything? Interesting. Oh, you know what it might be? Because it has to be the div, so it fills the, that might be what it is. And then on top of that, yeah, we'll stick with divs for now. Div, and then we'll say that this does have an OL, and we'll say the first OL should have an li of class is equal to main text. So this will be kind of our title, and we'll say this, or we'll say CS50 on Twitch. And then in my styles.css, I want to make sure that I have a class for the main text, which says text, font family. It's going to be PT sans. Oh, actually, no, rather. To simplify this a little bit, I'm going to say font family goes PT sans in my universal selector. Or body selector. I think that would probably work. And then I can say in here, in here where I say main text is going to be font size 48 pixels. Right? Let's see if that actually renders anything. OK. Wait, what is going on? Container. Class is going to be equal to sidebar. OK. Container. There we go. I forgot to save the HTML page. That'll do it. Oh, but man, that black text on that color is not looking good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say anything in the sidebar should probably have the color of white. There we go. OK for now. Total size using Emmet, H40 and tab, BGC for the background color, good shortcuts. Make container with 100%. Oh, VD Hug, good point, good point. I was confused because the nav bar was a child of the body, and that still wasn't applying the oh, 100%. I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Yes, absolutely right. I brain farted on that one. So the, I guess, container then needs to have height of 100%, or width and height of 100%, right? So container, width 100%, height 100%. Does that works, right? And then we can have does the width, oh, so does the container not get a default height and width, actually? This isn't something that I ran into when I was messing around, which is, it makes sense, actually. So height 100 VH, right? OK, well, we'll try that. So height is going to be equal to 100 VH, and then width is going to be 100 VH, not percent. So virtual height, or virtual, this needs to be virtual width, right? There we go. So thanks to VD Hug for that. So you can't actually use, so the body does it, for some reason I was thinking the body got a percent implicitly. But no, you do indeed need a VH. Does it resize? Oh, it does. That's pretty cool. Now that's not what we want, actually. We want it to be a specific width. So actually, what we can say is width should be, let's say maybe 200 pixels. Was that going to be big enough? No, that's not big enough. We'll say the width can be 600 pixels. Let's say 800 pixels. OK. Oh, right, because this is screwed up like that. That doesn't feel like 800 pixels. What's going on here? OK, so container is, oh, because this, I'm doing it to the container, not the sidebar. That's my fault. OK. Width needs to be 600. We'll say 600 pixels. And that needs to be 100 VH. Then we do that. OK, so that's too big. So then 400 pixels. Boom. OK, apologies. That was painful. A little off topic, but would it be possible to use a Jekyll template or a theme for a Flask app or any other sort of template for the front end? I have to imagine. Well, actually, I'm not sure because it's by definition static. I don't do much of this, the Jekyll generation for our stuff here, so I would maybe look into that and see. You might have to Google that. David might know more if he's in the chat still. I'm not sure. But Jekyll is typically designed for static pages. Jekyll is typically used for static pages. Jinja and Flask are more for dynamic server-served web pages. Anyone know how to add macros for Vim and VS Code? I'm not sure. I know that Adam, I thought, had a... It might actually have been VS Code that had Vim bindings, but I'm not 100% sure. In any case. Now, the interesting thing about this is I could actually scroll down if I scroll my page. And that's not what I want. I want to be able to actually scroll my right content separate from my left content, which is kind of an interesting thing. And so what we can do is I can say, and by the way, we should set containers text align to be, do I want to do that? I do want the sidebar Would this actually work? OK, that works. So text align center does work relative to its parent, which is kind of cool. So OK, so I was a little worried that this wouldn't apply to, it wouldn't take the parent into consideration, or I guess it wouldn't text align center it because it would apply to its children, but you can apply it directly to certain text elements and it will work. VS Code has a bunch of plugins, says Walsh9. I'm sure there is one that has Vim bindings. Yeah, probably does. I haven't looked. I'm not a Vim user. I know how to use Vim slightly, but not too in depth. In any case, let's go ahead and set the. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this h2 to be. And then this OL is going to be classes equal to links. And then this class is just going to be a link. And it's going to say, this is going to say CS50 on Twitch. And this is going to say main page. This is going to say Facebook. So we'll pretend this is kind of like a sequence of links to all of our other content. We'll say YouTube. We'll say Twitter. And then we'll say Reddit. Right? These aren't actually going anywhere. But now I actually have some links there on the left side. They're a little small. But maybe I want to have links be a little bit more padded out. So I can say maybe margin left to 10 pixels. Try that. Does that work? Oh, are those? Oh, is it still setting it to be a UL? That's weird. And also, why are they? Wait, what is? That is strange. OK, it's a UL, but it's an oh. This is an ordered list. I'm stupid. Sorry. I thought I was doing an unordered list. That was my fault. I need to do a UL, not OL. I had it for some reason backwards. OK. That's OK. So OK, so the UL is going to be, OK, so that's margin left. We're actually going to set that to 30 pixels. It's a little bit. There we go. And then I don't like this dot in front of it. So I'm actually going to say list style none. And that gets rid of the dots. If you're using a list and you don't want those dots or whatever, which is, I think, similar to what CS50 does for its own links here. Yeah, these don't actually have a list styling to them whatsoever. So we can get rid of that. So no more list style. I don't like the size. So I'm actually going to say font size. We'll say these are going to be 20 pixels. So that's a little bit better, a little bit nicer. Let's say that the main text is going to have some margin bottom. Let's say maybe 50 pixels. So things are a little bit more separated down. And actually, we could center that a little bit better. But just for a demonstration, this isn't going to be super fancy. We're already at 3 hours. I want to make sure that we can demonstrate a few of these concepts in detail before we cut for the day, go to the next CSS stream. Let's go ahead now and do a couple of things. So right now, currently, if we try to scroll our page, right, regardless of whether we have content here, and actually, I'm going to fill that content with, I'm going to say, let's say, let's go over here. I'm going to use some lorem ipsum. So lorem ipsum is pretty good for mocking up websites. So let's go to lorem ipsum. Go into here, go down to generate lorem ipsum. I'm just going to take a bunch of these paragraphs and just copy them right into the page. So let's do this right here. And just for ease of viewing, I'm going to toggle word wrap. Cool. And then let's go ahead and do the same thing here with the next paragraph. Another paragraph. I just want enough content to go below the screen, right? And to illustrate a couple of important things. This all needs to be indented. So we'll do that. And then we'll do that. And then we'll do this one. And we'll make the font size a little bit larger for these, just so that we can fill the screen a little bit. Let's go back here. Now let's see what this looks like. Currently, it doesn't quite look the way we want it to look. We have our nav bar here, but again, we're using block level elements. So we're using the div on the left. Oh, you think you do lorem ipsum 20, it'll generate 20 words for you? Yeah, what I wanted to do was break it up into paragraphs. But yeah, I probably should have just done a long paragraph. But we have a couple of problems. So we have, first of all, our nav bar ends, right? We can scroll down below our nav bar, and it's still there for some reason. It doesn't end at the bottom of our page. Like it's an element that kind of exists that we can move around, which is not ideal. And yeah, Denix is saying flex time. We might actually be able to get to bypass using flex altogether. What I want to do is actually kind of change the way we're displaying stuff a little bit. So there's one cool thing that we can do and it's called position. And we can use position fixed. And what that'll do is it'll actually fix it to our web page. No matter where we scroll, that'll always be in that area. And it gets rid of actually the sort of block display way that our web page is being calculated. And as a result of that, it's sort of like almost no longer being seen as a div that has block level positioning. It's being set to position fixed. It's there always, no matter where we scroll. I can demonstrate this in a second. If I were to scroll this page on the right, we would see that. What I can do now is and the sidebar is, I want the sidebar to actually be 40%, not 400 pixels. So if I do this, see if this still works. OK, that's cool. So that's perfect. And then I can set the actual not the container, but the content to be 60%, right? So that'll be fine. It's causing an issue at the moment, I think. But notice that it's kind of hidden. But I can actually scroll. And you'll see the scroll bar on the right, maybe, on the stream. I'm not sure if you can see it too easily. It's actually kind of behind my head and behind the chat. But we can scroll the page. And regardless of where we scroll in the page, that nav bar is staying static. It's fixed. It's position fixed, right? So now I can do, and we saw this earlier, actually. We looked at the CSS or the CS50 page, and we saw if we were looking at our content that it's actually pushed over to the right with this orange, this margin, which this margin is actually the size, the 40% of our page, right? So if I say content margin left 40%, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I might have this wrong. Yeah, that's currently incorrect. So because what is it? The content is the container. Oh, is the VW screwing it up? The VW might be screwing it up, actually. Let me see, container. Oh, because I'm using virtual height, not virtual width. That'll screw it up. So there we go. So don't use VW, don't use VH when you're trying to use virtual height size. Use virtual W. Now, this is cool. It's not quite working the way we want. So what I can do is I'm going to do what the person recommended before with, where was it? We're using fixed and not relative so that this bar is always here no matter how far we scroll. If it were relative, it's still going to be positioned relative to its place in the DOM lint, and it won't stay in the same area. Colton needs beverages. Where's pizza? I missed the beginning of the stream. Why ordered list HTML tag and not a UL? Because we don't want numbers in this case, Dinks987. We wanted just this list of things here without any numbers. I mean, ultimately it didn't matter because we took the text decoration or the list style and we made it none. But ultimately that's what we wanted to do. And Juban3 actually noted earlier when I was using VH units and I needed to use VW units, I thought I had made that change, but I must have messed up a little bit. Where was the box sizing border box? That's what I wanted it to do. So we go over here to box sizing border box. And then I can say, and I believe this is going to work, and then I can say padding, because remember we wanted padding, not margin necessarily. Padding of, oh, actually this might screw it up because we're shifting it over. That shift might be considered part, oh wait, no, I'm in the wrong spot. What am I doing? The, I have to think about this because the border box, I think that will apply to the margin, if I'm not mistaken, and not only the padding, which would screw up the way we're trying to do this. So let me see. Content we can make. So if I were to do what was it? Was it border style? Box sizing border box. And it says the specified width and height and respective min-max properties on this element determine the border box of the element. Oh, I see. OK. So this actually should work. I can then say padding 30 pixels. Will this work? Awesome. So an excellent CSS property, which I apparently needed to do a little bit more research on. But yeah, the reason this works is because the border box is separate from the margin. So we can say box sizing border box. And actually, let me make the size of this text just a little bit larger here. If I say font size 32 pixels, or rather 22 pixels. Now I can actually scroll down. And we sort of have this nice left-hand menu. And I mean, this looks like crap, the CS50 on Twitch. It needs a little bit of margin top. So I can say margin top 10 pixels. Oh, that's a little bit better. I could say main text hover. And I could say text decoration underline. And now we get that underline feature, just like we did with the CS50 page. This is now something where we could add our own other content to it, right? Someone's saying, crap, I missed the beginning. What is he saying? It was the killer potato. Oh, no, this is not done with floats. This is done using just a little margin trick where we have something. We have this element here, which is position fixed. So this nav bar is fixed position, meaning that it will always be in the same exact position no matter what we do with our web page, no matter where we're scrolling. And this content is a separate div that's set to have a margin that's the size of this sidebar. So it gets shifted over by the margin amount. Then we have, what is the property? We have box sizing border box. such that we can then apply padding on any of this stuff, and it gets considered to be part of that 60% that we basically didn't shift it over by, the 60% that represents the width of the content itself. That is effectively how we got this example. You could do something similar to this like this in Flex, and I realize we probably need a separate video that goes into detail on Flexbox as well, which we probably can do. We're already at 3 hours and 18 minutes. So we'll probably take some questions now and conclude shortly. But this is essentially what I wanted us to get to at the end. Using CSS, we have a much more interesting web page. These should probably be anchor tags. They can be centered. We could have multiple layers. We could make this scroll bar here scrollable as well if it goes beyond the height of the page using, I believe it's overflow. I believe whether it's overflow auto or something else that gives it the scroll bar. Pretty handy feature. But yeah, this was the intro to CSS. At times it was a little slow. Again, I'm learning CSS for the first time this year in detail, more detail than I ever have. Generally, my CSS experience has been, here's a web page, figure out the CSS and figure out how to fix it. But obviously, knowing how this all works at a lower level is a more robust and sustainable way of learning. But yeah, at the end, here's our little web page, which has a sidebar and a content body using some cool tricks. So thanks everybody who tuned in today. I appreciated it. Thanks for sticking with me. Why margins instead of relative position, says The Killer Potato. You know, I think you could probably do that too. Let's try it. So relative position. The only tricky thing is you have to figure out where relative position is in terms of the percent, because we're doing this based on the percentage of the document body. So actually, that could be slightly difficult because you'd have to tell it where the relative positioning is exactly, and that's wherever the 40% mark is. There might be a way to do it, but I would need to I think do some research and figure out what would be the best way to do so. Roranaro, thank you very much for the follow, and Rajij Zerotech D. Thank you very much for the follows. CSS Grid next time, asked Bellacures. Yeah, sure. Let's take a look and see what that is. Complete guide to grid. Oh, OK. Yeah, I actually am not terribly familiar with grid, so I'm going to have to learn this. But on a future video, I could see this being pretty cool. We can take a look at it. Grid and Flexbox. That would actually be a nice stream, grid and Flexbox, and some of the things we could do with them. But I would love more ideas, as always. Not done with floats, though. To answer Ezekiel Potato's question again, done with margin. Position fixed and margin left. Isn't rem better to use than pixel? Yes, JL97. We talked about rem earlier in the stream. But yeah, it would be better to use rem. It's much more sustainable for making sure your web page looks uniformly good across multiple web browsers. Pavignite, I am learning CSS as well. Hopefully you learned something today. Maybe not. Maybe everybody here knows more than I do, which is completely fine. And actually probably not that unexpected. Highly appreciative of what you guys do, says Knitman. Learned a lot. What's the next stream about? Potentially we'll have one on Friday. I'm still figuring the details out of that. We may not have one this Friday. It'll go up. If not, on Monday, Nick Wong, I believe, is coming in to do a stream on a live CTF. So we're going to capture the flag in a sort of white hacker environment. And I think the plan is for us both to work on it together and to sort of simulate what the experience is like, either from a client and rather an infiltrator and a defender perspective, or as two infiltrators. I have to get the exact details on that, but it'll be a cool little white hacking foray, I suppose. And then next Tuesday, we'll do a code review, another code review. I'm planning on doing a game next week, which would be, I'm trying to remember. I don't have the schedule in front of me, and I just put it together yesterday. What's the game I'm doing next? The next game I'm doing is Solitaire. And so I think that might be next week, I think. So I think on Wednesday I'm doing Solitaire. And then Thursday, Friday, offhand I don't remember exactly. But the schedule will be posted soon when we 100% finalize dates and times, because we're still in the process of doing that. Just chatted with some of the folks today actually about that. And you can expect one code review next Tuesday and Solitaire, and then some other stuff around that. So lots of fun stuff that I'm really looking forward to. Alex Gabrielov, check out learnlayout.com. Learnlayout.com. Let me see. This site teaches the CSS fundamentals that are used in any website's layout. Oh, this looks cool. OK, so yeah, it covers the basics of layout stuff. Yeah, I'll take a look at it. Thank you for pitching that. If anybody else is interested in that too, in the CSS layout stuff, learnlayout.com. Looks like a cool tool. Walsh Knight, thanks for the stream. You're a great teacher and do a wonderful job of explaining your thought process while you're coding, which is always something I struggle with, says Walsh Knight. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Walsh. Hopefully it wasn't too painful as I worked my way through some CSS today. Bavignite says, the web apps I did with Flask are default, basic, or are already styled by distribution code in CS50 Finance. Yeah, that's true. We do provide a little bit of styling on our end, but it's nice, I think. And something I would definitely like to get really good at is knowing how to basically convert any of my thoughts into style. And it's a bit of a trial and error process, as we can clearly see today. Bavignite says, I know less than you, definitely. I am more kind of back end. I don't know. I know pretty little, but I studied the basics for this stream and have been studying a little bit for the last month or so. We missed quite a few things that I would have liked to cover. I kind of put together a huge list of stuff here. A horizontal nav bar I think would be nice in the next CSS stream. Like a simple blog would be pretty cool. And then something that more robustly demonstrates Flexbox, maybe a photo app, which with automatically readjusting, sort of like masonry, readjusting the photos in the grid. I think that would be pretty cool. We could do that with grid and Flexbox in the next one per what Bellacure suggested. I'm doing CCDC next week. Oh, I'm not sure what CCDC is. What is CCDC? It's not the Cambridge Crystallographic Data Center, is it? Something suggests to me that might not be what it is. When is the Cali stream, asks Bavik. I think that's in a few weeks is when Nick and I talked about having that one. I would say, yeah, it's going to be a while. When and where will the schedule be posted, says the Killer Potato. It'll be here on Twitch for sure. We have all of the videos, that we're going to put together. They get an entry made on our Facebook page, facebook.com/CS50. And then we get them posted to Reddit and Twitter as well. Raw UK, thank you very much for the follow. Would hate to miss out again. Yeah, no, definitely tune into the. I'll put together the schedule as soon as I figure out and confirm with all the people hosting them whether they can 100% do them. Like I said, I put together the schedule yesterday, and so a lot of it should be pretty hard set. Again, I'm not sure about Friday, still figuring that out. But Tuesday, code review. Monday, 99% a capture the flag stream. Wednesday, I believe solitaire, and then Thursday, Friday, we got some other stuff. Oh yeah, Friday we're doing Bootstrap. So Aaron and I are doing Bootstrap next Friday. So we'll be covering, sort of tied into this, some more high-level ideas using, what it is to use a framework. And then we need a JavaScript stream, which will probably be the week after that. CSS is so hard, says Bellacures. Thank you, Colton, for making it easier to understand. Well, I appreciate if I was able to, and I appreciate the kind words, and I hope I was indeed able to make it easier to understand. We will need some more follow-up streams to fill in all the gaps. We do have some more gaps to fill in. VD Hug says, I never watched any game streams. If I want to watch the next game stream, I have to watch the older first, or do you start from the beginning? I usually start from the beginning. I kind of assume a little bit of familiarity with what we've done in the past. But no, definitely watch the prior VODs if you have time. But if not, I'll usually kind of cover from the basics, what we're doing. We usually use Love, which is a game framework, and then Lua, which is the programming language that the framework uses. Alex Gabrielov, thanks, Colton. Good stream. See you next time. See you, Alex. Thank you for joining. Alex Gabrielov. Could go over this site next time. Yeah. Oh, I'm all right. Thank you so much, though. JL97, security. Oh, red hat, blue hat. Yeah, I think Nick wants to cover all of that in the near future. Certainly with the CTF stuff, I think a lot of that is kind of tied into security. But I think the plan is to kind of approach it from a white hat perspective. I don't know what red hat and blue hat are, to be honest with you. But I think we want to encourage people hack ethically. CSS could be messy, but thank you for your stream, says Frank Wine. Now I've got a more structured approach to it. Well, awesome. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate the kind words. JL97 fourth link. I'm not sure what that's a reference to. Definitely learned things and made a bookmark for helper links, says Bavik Knight. Oh, awesome. That's great. When doing Bootstrap, it'd be possible to cover how and why certain things work, how they are defined within Bootstrap, says the Killer Potato. We can take a look. Certainly, a lot of the internal whys for how things are defined might have more of a history to it than we could glean on simply reading the documentation. But we'll definitely take a look. Excited about Bootstrap and jQuery/Ajax as well, says Bavik. Yeah, me too. Those would be really cool. Google CCDC. I just did JL97, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking at. Unless it's the National Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. That sounds more like what you're describing. VD Hug. Thank you very much, Colton. Love your work and all the CS50 crew. Awesome. Thanks, VD. Much appreciated. And then thanks for the stream. Colton says Asley. Thank you for tuning in. Cool. All right. Thanks everybody who tuned in. So if you have any last questions, I'm going to bring us back here. We covered a lot of content today. I tried to take it kind of slowly. And I also struggled a couple times to remember a couple of the properties. But like I said, still learning. Next CSS stream, we will go into more high-level concepts, Flexbox, CSS Grid. Before that, we might even do a JavaScript stream. So we can maybe tie the two together. We could do some basic JavaScript and then do some CSS and sort of describe some of the ideas we talked about today, like making sure all things in an entire document get underlined when we click or press on something. So we'll see how that works in a later stream, and we'll think of some ideas. And as always, if you have ideas, definitely submit them. Yeah, awesome. Hair is still amazing. Appreciate that. Killer Potato. Thanks for the stream. CSS Bavik. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. We'll see you potentially on Friday. Tune in